A few years back, when I was around 18, I entered a very rebellious phase in my life. I've always been a prodigy child, always did what I was told, never stayed out late, didn't smoke, didn't drink, scored the highest in all of my classes. All of my family, my friends and my friends' families thought that I was the perfect kid. But then something changed. I was on a lot of medication due to my health, and I started going through bouts of depression or whatever. I started acting up like never before. I stopped going to school, I would stay in bed all day, didn't talk to anyone, and then slowly I started talking to strangers online. Initially it was just talking to them online. I would talk to a few people until I found someone interesting. I would dedicate all my time talking to them till they no longer held my interest, and then I moved on to the next person. This went on for about a year. Then eventually I started meeting these people in person. Most of these meetings, they were sexual, and I was very reckless. I slept around with more people than I would like to admit, and regardless of my lack of concern for my own safety, I somehow never met anyone that had any evil intentions. We'd meet a couple of times, do the dirty, and that was that. Until I met this one guy. I was talking to a couple of guys at that time. I wasn't in any sort of relationship, but just being a hoe, I guess. So this guy starts to talk to me and asks me about my hobbies, my interests, what I do. I told him that I do not smoke or drink, and he was shocked by that. I told him that it wasn't that I'd never done it. I tried it, but just felt like it wasn't my thing. We talked for a couple of weeks. I ended up talking about how I've even been going through depression, and at first he just listened. Eventually he started telling me that I should try smoking. It would help me to relieve my anxiety and stress. And I always turned it down, but he was relentless. After a month or so of talking online, we decided to meet. We had never had any sort of sexual conversation or anything, so we were just going to meet as friends. I was supposed to meet another guy, an acquaintance, for something that I needed. So I suggested to the online chat guy that we meet briefly for lunch and then he could drop me off to another guy's place. He agreed and we decided on where and when to go. Now, the day that we were supposed to meet, we met at a local cafe. We had brunch and then I got into his car for him to drop me off at the place that I had to go. It was a good 45-minute drive, so I put on some songs and decided to relax. 5 minutes into the drive, he offered me a cigarette. I declined. He insisted, and kept insisting till I gave up and agreed. I opened the box and there was only one cigarette in there. I told him that it was his last one and asked if he was sure that he wanted me to smoke it since he would have enjoyed it more than I. He said yes. I took the cigarette out and there was something odd about it. It didn't look like it was store-bought. It rather looked like it had been rolled by hand. But then again, I had never smoked enough cigarettes to be sure, so I just lit it and smoked it. I couldn't even smoke half of it though. It made me inexplicably nauseous. So I gave up halfway through and I offered it to him. Instead of smoking it, he put it out and threw it away. I thought that was weird, but assumed that he probably didn't want to smoke while driving. 30 minutes into the ride though, and I started feeling really sick. My whole body was now shaking. I was extremely nauseous, and I could barely keep my eyes open. I kept telling him that I wasn't feeling good and that maybe we should go to the nearest ER instead of where we were going. But he kept telling me to relax and lay back. Everything about that ride felt really off now. I told him too to stop the car and drop me off wherever we were. He refused. All I could think of was pulling out my phone and calling for the police. When he noticed what I was doing, he immediately stopped the car and I got out. I couldn't stand, so I sat on the roadside and called the guy that I was supposed to visit. He immediately drove to where I was and picked me up, took me to his place where I threw up all over his living room multiple times. For the next hour and a half, I just laid on the couch, my whole body shaking and constantly throwing up. The guy brought me water, gave me some electrolytes, and kept insisting on going to the hospital, but in the end I refused. I had no idea what I had smoked, but I was sure that it wasn't just plain old cigarettes, that much was clear. I was scared that if it had been some illegal drug and if the hospital caught on, that I would get into trouble, and I absolutely did not want my parents to find out what I had been up to. So, in the end I just laid there, kept throwing up and letting whatever that stuff was get out of my system. All these years later, and I am now married to the guy who picked me up from the roadside and helped me through an insanely embarrassing time. I've been thinking about sharing this for a while now, and I had a little time today, so I figured that I would get your opinions. This is actually pretty long, but I do feel that everything that I mention here is important to the story, or to understand my thinking and reaction, I guess. There's a little bit of setup and some backstory required, so please just bear with me. Now, my family has Appalachian roots, and I spent a lot of time growing up in the mountains of West Virginia. A strong sense of and respect for the paranormal and one's ability to sense it was instilled in me from a young age. I was always taught to listen to your instincts. When something feels wrong, it is. And when your gut tells you to get out of a situation, you do. As kids, we would go playing out in the woods often. This was really common in my family, and we, the kids, just set off after breakfast, take a packed lunch, and we were expected to be back by dinner, supper as they would say. We didn't take maps or anything, and the older kids taught the younger kids how to navigate, and somehow we always made it back home. At the beginning of summer, and often before heading out for the day, my great-grandma would drill into us the rules. I can't think of a better way to say it, but rules included things like paying attention to animals that don't appear right, no whistling, never acknowledge your name being called, always counting your group to make sure that you have not lost or gained one, and most importantly, if something feels wrong, you would get out of the area quickly. Now, I can think of a few times during our daily adventures where one of Great-Grandma's rules came into play, but it just wasn't a big deal. It was always treated as one of those facts of life type of things. When we would get back and tell her what happened, she would explain what happened and give us pointers if we ran into something like that again. I guess it was more of we coexist with these things and have to protect ourselves when we encounter one than a sense of fear. No different than running into a dangerous animal, and nothing bad ever came of any of these run-ins. But that brings me to what happened in Louisville. One more point that I feel is important to the story is that I am 6'1", 250 pounds, a man. So, needless to say, generally, people do not intimidate me or make me feel unsafe in any way. So, it was the summer of 2021. I believe it was around the middle of July when this took place. I was there on business, and if you're familiar with the area, I was a few blocks from the Nulu area, but not all the way to Bardstown. It was in the middle of the day, and I had gone out to smoke in the parking lot. The parking lot was in no way isolated as multiple busy roads came together and snake around the block. I had been out there for a few minutes and was on the phone with my mum having a completely normal conversation when, suddenly, the strongest sense of dread that I had ever felt in my life came over me. I looked up and there was a woman walking down the sidewalk on the opposite side of the street. Walking, though, isn't really the right word any more than woman is. She wasn't really walking in the traditional sense. The best way that I can describe it is that she was trying to make it look like she was walking, but her legs were too long. I don't mean that her legs were literally too long, but that's the best way that I can describe it. Maybe like someone learning to walk on stilts almost. Her arms were wrong too, kind of like they would go from being too long to being too short or something. I also couldn't see her, kind of like she was blurry or not sort of rendered all the way. Mind you, it was not a hazy day or anything, and it was not very hot for July. I know that that may sound a bit hard to understand, but I don't know a better way to explain it except that I couldn't seem to bring her into focus, I guess. When I say, too, that I was overcome by fear, that doesn't even really do it justice. I have never felt fear like I felt that day. It was a fear that I didn't even know was possible to feel, like I was in the presence of some ancient evil that would make an encounter with a not deer seem like a nice picnic. This might sound hyperbolic too, but it is how I felt. I wasn't afraid for my mortal body, but almost like I was afraid for my soul. As soon as I noticed her, I was frozen in this fear though. Part of my brain was screaming at me to run, but I couldn't move a muscle. I could hear my mum talking through my AirPods, but I had no idea what she was saying and couldn't process it. I stood there frozen as she was making her way towards me. I genuinely have no idea how long it was, but at best I would guess a couple of minutes I stood there focused on her. She continued her weird attempt at a walk and stayed out of focus until she was almost directly across the street from me. I would say that there was maybe about 20 feet separating us, taking into account the 2-lane road and the sidewalks. When she was almost directly across from me, she finally came into focus. She was just a little old lady, maybe in her late 70s or early 80s. Once I made that connection, my rational brain tried to tell me that I was just being ridiculous and it was just a little old lady. I have nothing to fear from a little old lady. Even if she was crazy and tried to attack me or something, I could pick her up and punt her across the street if I needed to. But the instinctual part of my brain just wasn't interested in hearing that for some reason. When she was directly across from me, she paused. She turned to look at me and was kind of jerky in a way. When she did, her face was wrong too. It wasn't like something out of a horror movie, and I can't tell you exactly what was wrong with it, but it was wrong. It was kind of like one of those magic eye pictures where you see the 3D image when you unfocus your eyes. She smiled at me and her mouth was too big. It was almost ear to ear, in fact. For some reason, that smile is what finally broke the paralysis too that had me rooted in place, and after that, I ran. I ran in the opposite direction and only stopped when the area was fully out of view. When I finally came to my senses, my mum was yelling into the phone asking if I was okay. She informed me that I had just stopped talking for a little bit and then screamed and she could hear my breathing. I don't remember screaming, but I must have, and I believe her. As I got a hold of myself, I told her what had happened, and she asked me not to go back to the area anytime soon. Not that you could have paid me enough to go back there right away anyway, but I took an Uber to my hotel and I started making arrangements to cut my trip short. The next day, I took an Uber back to my car and had the driver drop me off directly behind where I was parked. I got in my car and started it and floored it to get away from there. I left Louisville in my rearview as quickly as I could. I have been back since then, but when I have to go to that area, I always go with a group and I avoid it if at all possible. Now, I've been trying to rationalize this since then, and I just cannot come up with a rational explanation for what I saw. I don't do drugs, I don't drink alcohol, and I don't have any underlying psychological issues or a history of them in my family or anything. I had never before and have not since had an experience like this one, and the only conclusion that I can draw is that I ran into something paranormal, but I truly have no idea what it was. I guess that's where you guys come in, because I'm really hoping that someone out there has some idea as to what this was. I've done my best to be as unemotional and factual as I can here. I've tried to leave out any hyperbole or emotions, even though it is very difficult to discuss this without bringing emotions into it. Also, I will point out that the human memory is not perfect, but every little detail seems like it's burned into my mind. I dream about this experience frequently, in fact, and I can still see her in my mind's eye. So I was in grade 9 at a really terrible school. The system there sucked, and it was located in a dangerous area of the city that I lived in. I actually just remembered this story because it was so usual for things like this to happen there that for me, it was just sort of normal, so I forgot it. But looking back at it now, I realized that it was not normal at all. So, I was in PE class and we were running laps around the school on the sidewalk to stretch. I was with my friend group of 5 girls and we were walking behind as always because PE for us was talking about the school drama all period. We were walking and talking about the recent drama when a red truck slowed down beside us. It wasn't unusual. Every time we were walking outside of the school, a creepy man would slow down, so we didn't think much of it and just kept walking and ignoring him. We saw his truck 2 or 3 times more. He was driving around the school and slowing down every time that he passed by us, so we decided to tell our teacher. That made us go back inside, in the gym. We started playing whatever game that we were doing when the teacher came to me and told me that I was asked to the main office because someone was here to pick me up now. I was panicking because nobody was supposed to pick me up during class that day, and I thought that maybe something bad had happened to either my mom or my dad or somebody in my family. So I got changed into my normal clothes, grabbed my backpack and rushed to the office. When I got there, the lady told me that there was a man waiting for me outside of the main doors. I got a little bit confused because usually when my parents came to pick me up, they would wait in the hall until I got there. I took a look throughout the glass door and saw an old man. I had never seen this man once in my life. I quickly walked back to the office and told the lady that I didn't know this man, and what she told me next froze me. She told me that he had said that he was a friend of my parents and that they had asked him to pick me up because my mother got into a car accident. He told the lady my name and my last name, my age, my mum's name, and the grade that I was in even. I was shocked and immediately asked her if I could call my parents to confirm. So I called my dad and he told me that my mum was just fine and he was at work. The lady just told me to go back to class and I never saw that man again. I never knew what happened after I left, and how did he know all of that info about me? My parents talked to the cops about this, and there was never anything that came of it. We just never got any answers. Since that happened, I moved into a much safer city, and I hope that I never have to deal with anything like that ever again. I was living in Fiji Islands back in 2016 and I was 14 years old. This story happened to my family, but mainly my mum lived it. It was on the 31st of October and I was at my school for a Halloween-based party, and my parents and my little sister were going to a family friend's Halloween party, so the house was empty. My party finished at 9 p.m, and my dad came to pick me up but dropped off my mum and sister at the house because our security alarm was ringing. Because nobody was home, my family obviously called the security company over, and they sat in a van with 3 security guards. My mum opens the house and lets everyone in. They check the whole house and they see no one. My mother checks all the cupboards and under the bed with my little sister, who was only 12 at the time. The security go outside into the garden and in the basement to check if there is anyone, and it's not an accidental ring. We don't have any pets, by the way. My mum turns on all the lights from the living room and the balcony. She starts to open the window and the gates that protect all the windows to get on the balcony, but when she looks at the keyhole to put it in, she notices flip-flops on the floor. She then looks closer and sees 2 pair of legs hiding really close to each other against the wall under a garden sofa. My mum begins yelling, "They're on the balcony." The 2 guys got scared and jumped off the balcony into my garden. One of the guards grabs the guy, but the second intruder jumps on the guard and they run away, jumping over the fence and running into the forest. My mother regrets yelling, and if she had come down and talked to the security quietly, the guys wouldn't have run and they probably would have been caught. My mum is crying, holding my sister to her side and telling her everything will be okay. The security then called the police and They did a report describing the guys and started a search. The cops were here in like a minute since I live only like 100 meters away from the closest police station. The guys who jumped lost a hat, their flip-flops, and they left socks as well, to use as gloves we think, but also 2 knives. Sadly, the guys were never found again, but 2 weeks later, my mum pulls out of the driveway, looks in the rearview mirror of her car, and sees, she's 90% sure, the 2 guys there, opposite our house, staring at her. The short guy had the same new hat, and the other guy had brand new flip-flops. When my mum drove away to the police station, the guys were gone and they were never to be found again. I got home after with my dad and my mum and my sister crying. My dad was mad that he didn't stay, but my mum had drank and she couldn't drive at that time. Luckily, my mum saw them before she opened the window, otherwise, well, who knows what could have happened, right? Now, how did the 2 guys get on the balcony in the first place? Well, it's going to sound a bit stupid, but right next to the balcony where they were hiding, there are 2 wooden poles linked with a sort of weird plank. It's not to hang anything or anything, but it's just there. My dad asked the landlord to get rid of it, but the landlord didn't want to do that. To give more about this pole thingy too, me at 15 or 16 when I was already 6 foot, I could jump and climb onto my balcony because I did it to sneak out of the house to go see my girlfriend at the time. I'm now 21 and I live in Australia, and even though I didn't live this for myself, it honestly really scared me because I was young, and now that I live alone, I check the entirety of my house and make sure my house is always locked, to the point that I've locked myself out of my house way too many times because of it. Thankfully, I've never had to deal with anything like this in my life since then, but still, it's something that just never leaves you. Starting roughly 19 years ago, I'm 38 now, I was in the woods behind one of my friend's houses camping. We were maybe only 500 to 550 yards away from the house and only took a few steps in the direction of the house to see it on the other side of the cornfield that was used for hay that year. We had a fire started and we were just hanging out, talking and enjoying the summer night. We had gone to Lake Michigan earlier, and a girl that we met that lived nearby decided to come with us and hang out, being our one friend knew her, somewhat from his job or whatever. But we all agreed that she would get the tent and we would all sleep around the fire that night. After about an hour or so, we had an amazingly bright light shine down right over us. We all kind of freaked out and got up when a strong wind came down on us and the light slowly moved away. We all decided in the end that it was probably just a police helicopter looking for marijuana plants and saw our heat plus the fire on the thermal camera. So we all laid back down, and within maybe 10 minutes, we were all back to each of our hearts racing. As we laid there, there was an ear-splitting screech. Before any of us could get up, something with some considerable weight hit the leaf-littered forest floor. Now, all of us standing, a creature that seemed no larger than a wolf ran, not walked, multiple times around us before we could get a bead on its location. The girl that was with us now was in the tent doorway, and 2 of my friends had almost teleported into the tent. They moved that quickly in fear. At this point, the creature had stopped moving, but we still couldn't pinpoint where it had stopped. The only views that we could get was that it had a grey and white fur almost, not patterned, but random patches. We also realized that the helicopter that we figured was the dope scope was still nearby as well. Not far, but we could see stars being blocked out by it moving from west to east, almost like it was strafing now. Another 10 adrenaline-filled minutes passed, and we assumed that it had left. After another hour of laying there listening and waiting for its return, finally we all started falling asleep. In the morning, nothing in the campsite was disturbed and nothing was damaged. I walked back to the house to get some eggs and other things for breakfast. Nothing felt off except for the constant feeling of being watched from the woods, but after that long night, I could understand it. On the way back though, at a different angle of view, I noticed 3 distinct areas in the hay that were pressed down in almost a perfect triangle. Once I got closer, there was also a weird static feeling to the air and all my arm hairs stood up. As I got closer to the woods, a strong feeling to turn around hit me like a ton of bricks. Across the field, around 250 yards away, there's a piece of woods that splits the 2 fields, and in that narrow strip of trees stood what I can only describe as a cross between a dog and a great ape, about 6 to 7 feet tall, on 2 legs. It seemed, I'd say, uncomfortable being on 2 legs as it swayed side to side like it was unbalanced almost. At that, though, I turned back and I headed straight back to the campsite, made breakfast saying nothing to the rest as heading back to the house would have had us going right by that creature. Roughly 3 hours later, we headed to the house and there were no more sightings or feelings. Now, the next sighting was about 4 years later, while hunting family property about 4 miles from the original sighting. Sitting in the woods by myself that evening, I had a group of 4 does come in. I would sit back in the thicker woods, but I had a 270 sighted in at 100 yards. I had 3 lanes that were optimal for that rifle, but 2 years before got a hard shot on a buck only 75 yards away and threaded a needle with the bullet, so I was very comfortable with any shot at this point. Anyway, the does were calm and moving slowly, feeding with no care in the world. After several minutes, the largest doe kept checking behind them though, hearing something, but I couldn't. They all suddenly jumped at the same time and even crashed into trees trying to get away. I still heard nothing and I couldn't see anything in the direction that she kept looking. But then I noticed a grey and white-haired creature moving in down like a canine hunting. When I got the first look, I immediately recognized it too. This time though, I didn't have any anxiety, no racing heart, and felt completely calm, unlike the first encounter. It was not because I had my rifle as well as the first encounter I had my shotgun that I carried. Maybe it was the distance, I don't know, but it moved through the woods and almost seemed to be avoiding me, but also feeling that it knew that I was there almost. It walked behind the denser underbrush and would almost leap through the shooting lanes that I had, as to try and stay hidden and not give me a shot, I think. Not that I was going to, as I have a strong belief that cryptids and paranormal interaction should be viewed and felt with strong actions, at least resort option. But it only made a very low growl as it would have been entering the field, about 75 yards from me. I waited around 30 minutes before heading in for the night, as the creature moving through would have kept anything from coming in. As I walked back, I never felt the need to rush or even look behind me. Coming into the small grass field that we let grow over on the property, there once again was a rush of wind and a dark object in the sky, which I could see better this time as a sort of triangular-shaped object, but had rounded out sides like a triangle that was filled, and the sides were about to burst almost or something. It moved slowly the direction the creature moved, and then quickly disappeared in the opposite direction extremely fast. Now, the last time that I had an interaction with the same creature was about 3 years ago, but now 50 to 55 miles to the south. I was hunting the Appalachian state game area only a few days into the firearm season. Anyone that knows that area during deer season knows that it is filled with hunters from all over. I usually would go to the more difficult areas as the city people wanted to hunt 10 feet from their vehicle and not have to work for their deer. I was deep in the woods by the Swan Creek area, and the sun was just starting to set up to be able to break through the dense trees. I'm used to the weird and sometimes unsettling feeling that the area gives you, but today felt particularly strange. I hadn't seen any other cars on my way to the area, so I felt good about a successful hunt. As the minutes went by, I could hear a few deer moving in and was hoping that a buck wouldn't be too far behind them. It was cooler this morning than the last few, and it was easy to see one's breath. I started seeing breath from behind some berry shrubs that I believed to be the deer that I had heard, and was excited to see them move through it. After 10 minutes went by and the breathing kept coming from the same spot, I started thinking that maybe there was a buck behind the shrubs and he can smell me or know something's up. But then the does all booked it through the opening by the shrubs and full speed ran through the woods. Something had obviously spooked them, but shortly behind them was a sight that I had honestly forgot about, and this time had my heart almost exploding and my anxiety at absolute max. So I'm around 1,000 yards in dense woods with many hollows and ridges to get to my vehicle, and nobody hunting with me to try and get to me. Being the zone that I was in, I had my shotgun, but with what I have seen in the past, I wasn't too sure if I was safe even with it. I traveled roughly 150, staying relatively slow as to not make any noise. As I waited by a tree and was listening and looking behind me, the woods suddenly became absolutely dead quiet. No birds, no squirrels running about, and no wind even. Some would perhaps think that this is good because you can hear everything, right? But those who spend time in the woods know that when an apex animal moves in, either the warning calls go off or it goes absolutely silent in the woods. I kept moving at a more increased pace, and I kept checking my phone for better service to call in my in-laws to head out to the area for assistance if I needed. I was maybe 200 yards from my vehicle, and I saw what I honestly thought was going to be my end. On a small mound about 75 yards ahead stood a creature on all fours. But this one was different. The hair was brown and black, looked to be bigger, and this time the front half was fully visible, and I could see that it was the same kind of beast that I'd seen each time before, sort of half wolf, half ape. And honestly, it looked something like a test tube baby of some mad scientist. It stared directly at me for about 5 minutes, and I was sure that the other was somewhere close watching from behind. Then a huge gust of air came through the trees, and the creature ran as if it was being hunted itself. I leaned against the tree by me and sighed and felt a huge relief wash over me, almost like a shower of protection. I opened my eyes and looked up, feeling that I would see the same thing as before, but there were clouds and an open sky. Then the clouds seemed to distort and get sort of morphed, kind of like when glass has a curve or a defect and it distorts your view of objects behind it. And I knew then that it was another craft flying above the trees, and it was either a different one altogether or a different mechanism to hide, being that it was daylight this time. Now, for about 2 years after, I had almost ghost-like visits from whatever these things were. That's really the only way to explain it. They both would show up in the woods while collecting firewood or on a walk with my kids. I never got the same feelings I did the other times. I felt like it was a memory playing in my head, except they moved and did things that I couldn't really see them doing. One day I had my dog with me, which I trained to protect my kids and wife at the time. He'd even attacked me when my ex took him in the woods on a leash. I put on a new hoodie and pulled the hood over my face, and he came after me and even called his name. Didn't calm him just when he was close enough to smell me that he finally caught wind that it was me. But he was not on a leash this day, and not even 10 feet in, his hair raises and he starts growling, but he seemed confused as to why himself. Then, that was when I saw 2 of these things, 20 feet ahead. And now this is going to sound really weird, but I could sort of see through them, and they moved as if they were made out of smoke or something. The dog lunged at one and went right through it, and it dissipated like a mist thinning in the morning sun. The other walked behind a tree and just never came out of the other side. It's been a few years now, and I haven't seen the creatures fully, but keep getting shadows at the edge of my view that sort of look like them, and they keep getting close on both sides each time when I'm walking in the woods. But the biggest problem with all of this is, how can what was a fully physical interaction with what I figured was a cryptid or maybe otherworldly being now be more spiritual in nature? It almost seems like a soul following me. I know that this all sounds so crazy, believe me, but could they have died and Am I the one that they didn't get, or are they protecting me like a calling or something? Either way, holding it in for years and keeping the other two encounters from other people I still talk to from the original group, I finally figured that I would share these instances and just put them out there, just to get them off my chest and hopefully get some help and some understanding, I guess. None of it has really interfered with my life, I guess, other than a few close heart attacks from anxiety or the couple of sleepless nights right after the encounters. And in the end, I guess all I can say is, take this all as you will. I am looking forward to hearing what you guys might have to say about it, though. I guess I'm just a bit lost, and I'm hoping that I can get some answers, or at the very least some theories. I needed to get this out there, and I'm wondering if there are others with the same type of bizarre interactions that last decades like this and even seem to just change so drastically. I moved in with my best friend a little over a year ago. She lives in an old trailer home, and it makes plenty of creepy noises at night. Sometimes when I'm trying to sleep, it sounds like people are moving around the main living space. I normally just try to ignore it, and I never say anything about it to my friend because she scares easily. But last night was different. I wasn't even in my room. It was around midnight, and I left my room to have a smoke, then went to the bathroom. Just as I was about to open the bathroom door and go back to my room, I distinctly heard someone walking through the kitchen or dining area. I assumed it was my friend getting a midnight snack, but when I left the bathroom, the house was quiet and there was nobody in the kitchen. I glanced in her room. She sleeps with her bedroom door open, and I could see the shape of her body fast asleep in her bed. Immediately, I thought that we might have an intruder. The sound that I heard was that loud. But when I remembered that we have a German Shepherd who would not have slept through someone coming in the house at night, I shrugged it off and I just went back to my room. But as soon as I closed the door, I heard the heavy footsteps again. This time it sounded like they were leaving the kitchen and going toward my friend's bedroom. I thought about leaving my room to investigate, but I hadn't seen anything when I left the bathroom, so I figured that I wouldn't see anything again. I just dismissed it as another weird thing in her house and forgot about it until tonight. Just before my friend went to bed, she looks at me and says, "I need to ask you something. Did you ever see figures of people in the house, just like their shape or outline, or weird noises?" This obviously got my attention, and I asked her why. She then proceeds to tell me that last night, she suddenly woke up and there was a figure of a man standing on the other side of her bed, just watching her apparently. And on his head, he looked like he either had a turban or maybe dreadlocks piled up. She wasn't too scared, but it was very unnerving. She was too tired to examine it any further and just closed her eyes and hoped that it was a hallucination. What she described, though, reminded me of a shadow person. I've had encounters with them before, and not just out of the corner of my eye, but they were always silent. It's just the combination of what I heard and what she saw on the same night that really has me scratching my head. And I guess I'm curious as to what your opinion is. I was having a sleepover at my best friend's house in the summer of 2019, like we always did. We were 15 at the time, and she lives in a small village where everybody knows everyone. There were really no weird people there as well, and it was a very safe place. Everyone was kind and friendly. So, it was about 10 p.m. and it was really dark outside. We were hungry and wanted to bake some cookies, but they didn't have all the ingredients to do it, so we decided to go to the nearest convenience store to get them. It was about a 5-minute walk in the dark because there were no streetlights. We started walking towards the store, talking and laughing about literally anything. On one side of the road, there was a huge church built at the end of the 1800s. It was abandoned, but they couldn't destroy it because it was historical. There's also a huge parking lot right in front that had small orange lights. It was on the other side of the road, the store that we had to go into. When we passed on the sidewalk in front of the church, we heard a weird classical music playing. It was just a whisper, but we turned our eyes to the parking lot and there he was. I still have goosebumps even thinking about this. There were no cars on the road, nobody was outside. It was dark and cold, but we saw a man, really tall and disgusting. His clothes were ripped and he looked like he hadn't showered in months. He was dancing in the church parking lot, doing ballet figures to a classical song at 10 p.m. on a random summer night. When we saw him, immediately we changed sidewalks to be far from him. Our hearts were racing as we entered the store. We got our things and we went to the cashier. She made us pay and we were panicked, so we told her about the man dancing in the parking lot. She was confused and went to the window to look, but there was no one there. We were even more scared when we got outside. Neither of us had our cell phones, so we couldn't call her dad to pick us up. We took a deep breath and we decided to pass by the neighborhood that was behind the convenience store instead of the main road in front, so our chances of seeing the man again would be much lower. We started walking in the dark, on the small roads with our bags. We kept our heads on a swivel and kept looking around us. Once we reached the main street, we almost had a heart attack though, because the man was there, dancing on the sidewalk, right in front of her house. We were panicking. I started crying quickly. I started tearing up a bit as we walked back into the neighborhood. My friend told me that she knew some people of our school that were living nearby and that we should go to their house, so we did. He didn't believe us at first and didn't want to walk us to her house. It was almost 11 and he looked tired, but I think he changed his mind because he saw us crying. So he put his shoes on and we started making our way back onto the main street. We told him what happened as we arrived to the sidewalk and there was nobody. The man was nowhere to be found. He walked us to her front door as we thanked him before entering the house and locked the door. We told her parents everything and in the end they just laughed at us, saying that we were being overdramatic and that it was one of the safest villages ever to exist and that we probably saw the wrong thing. We're both 19 now and we still have no idea what happened that night, but we stopped going out when it was dark. We talk about it sometimes and neither of us can really explain who he was and what he was doing there, and more importantly, how he knew where she lived. A couple of years back, when I was 14 roughly, there was this trail between my neighborhood and the school that I used to go to. It took about maybe, 10 minutes to get across it. It was covered full of tree branches and a deep valley that you needed to climb with a little creek running through it. This one particular autumn day, the leaves were falling off the trees and the temperature was getting lower. It was 8 degrees Celsius roughly at this point, and it was this one time that I experienced this hyper uncomfortable feeling that I was being watched by something. It's difficult to explain exactly how it feels unless you've either been hunted or been looked at with strong feelings. But I just had this feeling that I was being watched, and me being the paranoid and curious kid that I am, I took a glance back to where I came from. I saw nothing, and so I kept walking. But then I hear someone yell my name, and I look back expecting one of the kids from my neighborhood wanting to talk with me back home, but no, there was no one there. There was nothing behind me. I stood there too for about maybe a solid minute before I just bolted and I didn't look back. The problem with this whole thing is that someone could have been yelling my name as the valley sort of drops down, and it could have echoed, I guess. But the yelling seemed to be coming from this rock a little bit to the right. It seemed like whatever was calling my name was behind that big rock. These days, I believe that there was a reason that our ancestors were a bit wary of the woods. I've heard of skinwalkers and wendigos or flesh gates. The problem is that I live in Norway, so how could this be? So the other day I was getting flowers and dessert for my girlfriend who was at work. She works at a hotel. I got everything gathered and walked towards the front door, which was open since it's so hot and it was nighttime. She usually sits at the table right in front of the lobby in a specific chair off to the left. When I was walking closer, I saw her sitting there. She turned to look at me and we made eye contact. She immediately jumped off the chair since she's short and ran off to the left of the lobby behind some pillars. I thought that she was trying to scare me and thought that I didn't see her, so I played along and followed her to behind the pillars where the kitchen is at. I looked behind 2 pillars and nothing. But then, immediately afterwards, she says, "Hey," and she was behind me. I was obviously so confused and asked where she came from. She said from the back of the front desk, which is at the right side of the lobby. I suddenly felt weird, so I asked, was anyone in the lobby just now, specifically a girl or a woman, since there's cameras in the back that she was looking at. She responded that nobody else has been there. I didn't know what to make of the situation just now and started replaying what I just saw in my head and realized that my girlfriend was wearing contacts and whatever I saw was wearing thick black frames but wearing her exact uniform and had her hair up exactly like my girlfriend. I just really don't know what to think about this whole situation, and I'm asking if anybody else knows what this is or if it's happened to them. Also, this hotel is considered to be haunted, and I've had other things, little things happen, like knocking and hearing footsteps, but that's all. Nothing at all like this. I'm a female from a small residential town in Canada, BC. My story is based around 2016 to 2017. Not too sure on the months, but I know that it was in fall after around 2 weeks of working in the community school. So, for the first few paranormal experiences that happened to me, they were in the Broad office. That was like a minute walk from the back of the school. I know that I was in the Broad office alone because I always check to see if there's anybody in there staying late. So after I checked around to make sure not to scare anyone, I went downstairs where there is a meeting room that was used for storage, open space for shelf to store files and whatnot, and plus the washroom in the back corner. So I usually clean the washroom first before I go back up to clean the offices upstairs, clean the washroom, grab the garbage. Then as I was leaving the washroom, I hear some lady that I didn't recognize swear at me to the right side of me. I had my wired earphones hanging off of my ear just to hear my music. I know all the songs that I have on that playlist, and it definitely wasn't them. I looked over my shoulder to see no one standing in the dark corner. I swear that my heart almost stopped when I saw no one there. Then I booked it back up the stairs and I tried to calm myself down. I went back to cleaning, but as I was walking around, I looked out the windows to see if there might have been somebody outside, but there was no one around. Another time I went up to clean the Broad office. It was sometime in October. It was getting dark out earlier. I cleaned out the offices before I went down to the washroom. Downstairs, after I cleaned the washroom, I swept all the floors down there. As I was sweeping, I heard footsteps outside the stairs. I always lock the door when I'm in the Broad office. Then I heard the door unlock, door open then close, so I kind of yelled up to let whoever came inside know that I was there cleaning and apologized if I scared them, but there was nothing. No other footsteps, no response back. Thinking maybe they didn't hear me, I repeated myself. I even walked up saying hello, but there was nothing. I went to the front door to see if anybody was there, but no one. But I did see the door unlocked when I knew that I had locked it behind me. So in the end, I just said to heck with this, and I grabbed all the garbage in the hallway where I left them. I looked up towards the back offices, and one of the doors was now slammed shut. I ran out of there, locked it behind me, and I went back to the school shaking so bad that I had a bit of a panic attack. I called someone at that point to go and check on the Broad office. They helped me calm down and they checked everything out, but in the end, there was nobody there. On another occasion, I was on my dinner break sitting at the table on the side of the doorway. I was having my dinner and I was watching something on YouTube. I honestly can't remember what I was watching, but I do know that it wasn't too loud. When all of a sudden I heard a few soft knocks on a door in the hallway. So I paused the video, looked out the doorway to see if someone that needed me for something, but again there was nobody there. So uneasy now, I sat there listening to see if it happens again for about a minute. Then as I go to unpause the video, I heard scratching on the door right across the hallway from the office. I got up to walk over to the furnace room door, holding onto my phone in case I had to call my manager. As I got close, I said, "Hello, you know you shouldn't be in there, right?" Grabbed onto the doorknob to open it up, but it was locked. But it sounded like someone or something was moving around on the other side, so I started to call my manager, and as he picked up, there was a loud bang on the door. I jumped back at that as I kind of yelled into the phone, telling him what I thought was going on. I know that there is another way into the furnace room, but you would need to break in, to be honest. And yes, my manager heard the bang as well. I then heard movement right behind the door, and it was in place, not going down the stairs. I tried to open the door again, yelling that, "You can't be in there. You have to leave now or I'll have to call the cops." The door opened this time, and I quickly swung it open the rest of the way, but when I did, there was nothing. The lights were off that whole time too, so I flicked them on, then looked down to see what I can only describe as a shadow person's head leaning over from the corner, quickly pulling back to hide. It was so weird because the lights were so bright that I should have seen a face clearly, but it was just a completely black shape. I closed the door to wait a few minutes for my manager to show up. I was shaking the whole time, thinking back on what had just happened. The manager went to check things out, and then when he came back up to tell me that there was no one down there, everything was apparently locked, and nothing was broken. Another time on dinner break, one of my guy friends was covering one of the other janitors at the time. We were in the same office having our dinner. We were watching our own videos on our phones while eating. Yes, I already told him what happened to me. He's not a big horror fan like I am, though. While sitting there eating, I heard a long scratch on a door. Couldn't tell where it came from, but had a hunch where it was. I looked at him and asked, "Did you hear that?" He nodded, looking absolutely shocked, so I paused my video. I opened a Spirit Box app that I had on my phone and I started it. Yes, I was young and curious, wanting to find out whatever was there, wanted to tell us. And after a few seconds, a few random words popped up. I don't remember all the words, but what stays with me to this day is angry, stairs, and fire. We looked at each other, freaking out a little bit. Then we looked towards the door. As I stood up, the door opened slightly, so I told him to have the manager dial to his phone just in case. I ran over to pull the door open, but again I saw and heard nothing. The lights were left on this time, though. My friend slowly walked over as I stepped through the door to look down, but there was no one there this time. But I did hear footsteps running into one of the rooms down there. So I started to go down the stairs yelling, "Hey, you need to get out of here." Then I told my friend to call the manager. As I got to the corner, I saw one of the doors closing. It was a slow closing door, mind you. Before I could open it again, it was fully closed. And, weirdly enough, locked as well. I yelled while knocking on the door, "Hey, who is in there? You need to leave." I heard no movement for a bit while I tried to open the door, but then I heard a loud bang behind me from another door, like someone was using both of their arms. And it was at this stage that I thought to myself, to heck with this. I started running back up the stairs, telling my friend to watch my back in case someone tries to come after me. As I got closer to him, he told me that he saw the same thing that I did before, but their arm was reaching out toward us. And I just stepped onto the top stair when the lights went off. Thankfully, my friend moved back into the hallway, so I ran out and closed the door and held it as our manager rushed towards us. We told him what happened, and he checked things out, but again, nothing was wrong. But this time, though, there were small soft scratches on the furnace room door that definitely were not there before. I do have some other stories to tell from this place, but this will have to do for now as, believe it or not, I have to go back there for work. I live in Sacramento, CA, where every summer we have the state fair. I was in my late teens and my friend and I, both females, decided to check out the fair together. Parking was $10 and we were cheap, so we decided to park across the street. Well, a few streets deep in from across the street, because a lot of people had the same idea apparently. The fair was typical fair shenanigans, I guess, and we had a bit of fun. It was almost 10 p.m. and we decided to get out of there. The fair was lit up with lights and chaos, but the further that we got away from it, and the deeper that we got into the back streets across the street from the fair, the darker that it got and the less people you saw. My friend said, maybe I should get my mace out just in case, and we both laughed because both of our families at different points had given us mace to stay safe, but because we were young and dumb, we thought that we were invincible. My friend drove, so she was digging into her purse looking for her keys and slowed down while doing so, and I was a few feet ahead of her. At that moment, the fair fireworks started popping off in the sky, and I turned around to look for several seconds, and was walking backward while doing so. I turned around, and at that moment, as I was passing a creepy grey van, a man popped out behind it and grabbed me forcefully with both arms around me and started picking me up. Immediately, my friend ran up and sprayed mace in this guy's face, and she was able to do so because the mace happened to be attached to her keychain, which she just got out of her purse, mind you. She accidentally got some mace in my eyes, and man, did it hurt. But even though my eyes were burning, I vividly remember opening them up just enough to see that there was a cloud of mace floating in front of the guy's eyes as they were wide open, as if the mace almost didn't seem to affect him at all. Then he said calmly in a creepy voice, "I was just looking at her." We both screamed and he let me go, and we ran all the way to her car and got the heck out of Dodge. The weird thing though is that we didn't even go straight to the police that night because I wasn't sure if it was enough of an offense to do so, which I'm in my 40s now and know that it is, and my true crime-loving self now is pretty angry that I didn't go straight to the police then. I tried calling the non-emergency line the next day to report it as I was suffering from red and swollen eyes from the mace, and I was being placed on hold and not being taken seriously. So eventually I just had to let it go and I moved on with my life. But about a week later, I heard in the news that there was a man wanted by police that lingered around the American river trails, which is where the fair is, who is apparently abducting women and taking them into his van, and yeah, you probably know the rest. I always wonder what would have happened if my friend wasn't there that day. Would I even be here? I've never been so thankful to be maced in the face like that. Ladies, even men, carry mace or some type of self-defense tool because it's an unpredictable and scary place out there sometimes, and you just never know what could happen. When I was 17, my bedroom had a window looking out at my backyard. The backyard was fenced in, but on the other side of the fence there were some woods and a retention pond. I'd never been scared of this and kept the blinds open so that when the sun rose in the morning the natural light would help wake me up. But one night, I was up late on my phone with my dog laying in my bed next to me. At around 2 a.m, my dog jumped up and started barking at the window. At first, I Honestly thought that he was just barking at his reflection and told him to stop. But I then realized that he was looking at the left side of the window while his reflection was on the right. I couldn't see outside the window because I had left the lamp on my nightstand on. All I could see in the window was the reflections of my bedroom. Not wanting to alert whatever might be out there that I was scared, I faked a yawn, set my phone aside and turned off the lamp. I then laid face down facing the window, and I swear that I saw a set of human eyes looking back at me from the left side of the window. I drink a lot of water at night, so I had an empty bottle on my nightstand, so I grabbed it and pretended to just realize that it was empty. I turned on the lamp and acted like I was going to get some water. I went to my parents' room and my dad told me not to worry. We had these motion-activated floodlights and they hadn't turned on, so there was no way that anything was out there. I went back to my room and I told myself that I must just be seeing things. I ended up closing the blinds and I turned on the lamp and I just got some sleep. When I woke up in the morning, I went to take my dog out and decided to check out the pine straw bedding underneath my window. And when I did, it was visibly disturbed. I did my best to ignore that and tried to remember what my dad said about the floodlights. That worked pretty well, until my dad tested the floodlights later that day and found that the bulbs, they had been burnt out. To this day, I keep my blinds closed and my lamp off when I sleep. I don't want to risk anything being able to see me if anything is somehow peeking through my window. I would prefer to know if something is there, and I'm pretty sure that there was someone at my window that night. It was 2018, back when I lived in the suburbs of Paris. I've been playing Pokemon Go since its release, and I used to go out at night to play, always with my best friend on voice call. It was a night like any other as well, following my usual route. It was around 2 in the morning, and I had already covered a good 2 kilometers. I found myself about 1 kilometer away from home at this point, standing near a Pokestop, catching what I could while talking to my friend, just like every night. It was a residential street with a few streetlights, but quite dark as there was a field just behind it. After about 5 minutes, I noticed a man in his 30s on the opposite sidewalk, just a few meters away from me, holding head shears in his hand, and there was a pile of branches at his feet. I thought the man was just trimming the branches of his tree. However, when I described the scene to my friend, he said, "You should leave right away. No one does gardening in the middle of the night." Despite my friend's warning, I was so focused on Pokemon Go that I wanted to capture all the Pokemon before leaving, so I stayed while keeping an eye on the man's actions. As I looked at the man, I realized that he wasn't cutting any branches though. He was now just staring at me. He would occasionally move and also hide behind a parked van nearby while spying on me through the windows. However, he knew very well that I could see him, and I began to feel scared at this point. Despite my friends pleading for me to leave, I still hadn't caught all the Pokemon, so I hesitated to go at first. The man continued his strange behavior, crossing over to my side of the street and hiding behind some bushes while staring at me. Then, he went back to his pile of branches and stared at me again. Finally, I had had enough and I decided to leave. I walked normally towards my home, trying not to show my fear. I had a straight path back home. My friend on the call asked me to check behind me in case the man was following me. And when I did, indeed, he was, still holding the head shears, about 10 meters behind me now. I then made a left turn instead of going straight, even though it made my way longer. I wanted to be sure that he was actually following me and that it wasn't just a coincidence. He continued to follow me though. At that, I picked up my pace, taking snaps just in case something actually happened. When I reached the end of the street, I was out of breath but safe. There was no one behind me. I entered my home feeling relieved. Suddenly, a white car pulled up right in front, stopped, and the driver's window rolled down. and it was the same guy with his pruning shears, which meant that now he knew where I lived. I rushed inside, locked everything, grabbed a kitchen knife, and I just waited until somebody woke up so that I could go to bed. There was no further incidences, thankfully. Nobody believed me, of course, so we checked the surveillance cameras at home, and unfortunately, I was right. Everybody saw it, and everyone was definitely creeped out by it. So, before I begin, I just want to say that these stories are told by my family and friends through the years, along with some of my own encounters in the rural mountains and ridgelines of my county. I've grown up in eastern Kentucky for several years. Since the age of 1, my family on both sides have grown up in the rural Appalachians their whole lives as well, but as with modern times moved to the small town nestled here in the valley, situated in between rolling hills and deep ridgelines. Where the following stories take place is in a rural area, nestled deep in the Appalachian Mountains. It's got a name and it's considered a county. However, the area where my dad's family grew up within this area, and where these stories come from, is more like a collection of deep ridges, and mountain folks than anything else live there. Just to clear up any confusion that this is in an actual town. During the early days of the settlers, these mountains were home to the Cherokee Indians, and many cemeteries in this area have actually around 30 to 40 graves of Native Americans buried there, marked with stones and rocks. But rather than a more traditional Indian burial routine, in the 1800s, George Washington, Colonel Grayson, was bestowed upon him a 70,000-acre piece of land, which now is where my town is located at today. So, the first story. In the 1970s or 80s, my mum and her aunt, along with her small cousins, were driving in an empty road just outside of town when they crested the top of a hill where an abandoned farmhouse stood, and they stopped their car in its tracks when they saw a massive hovering saucer-shaped craft hovering over the house. Frightened, my mother and her aunt booked it out of there at a high rate of speed, scared that they continued down the mountain track to a town quickly. However, when they looked in the rearview mirror, they saw the craft coming after them at a high rate of speed, tailing the car and keeping up with it. They attempted multiple times to evade this craft, but it was to no avail. It chased them for over a mile back to town, until finally, just at the edge of the county road that leads back into town, it finally seemed to disappear. My mother has told this story at least 100 times to family and friends, most of which believe her, as they too have seen strange lights in the sky in and around various areas of the community, though some don't. Though, of course, some don't. She drew me a picture of the spacecraft a few years ago, which I still have. It's grey and almost metallic looking by the way that she drew it. It has red lights all on the edges of the bottom of the craft, along with a few green lights on the sides of it. The second story happened when my mother was a child, old enough to know when something was going on, and was at home with her parents and siblings one night, when a man who her mother and family already knew and were acquainted with barged into the house and scared everyone out of their wits. He lived in a cabin deep within the woods some miles away, and during his stay there, he reported poltergeist activity, orbs, and paranormal activity within the property and house itself. He would go on to tell my grandmother that, reportedly, he was tormented all night by a demon who threw pots and pans, glasses, and even furniture at him. This went on almost all night, and it would throw them completely out of the cabinets, almost hitting him with it. Also reportedly started knocking and tapping on the sides of the house and thumping the walls and the ceiling and all that sort of stuff. Finally, he mustered up the nerve to utter the Lord's Prayer and attempt to rebuke it in the name of Jesus, and this just seemed to make it worse, and it caused it to become even more aggressive, and now would try to kill him with even heavier objects, it seemed. It was at that point that he ran from the house, and he spent around 7 to 8 hours walking through the woods and rural country back to my grandmother's house. But while on his way to the house, he reported that he could have sworn that he heard footsteps trailing him in the woods, and next to the road, he couldn't see anything, and it continued like this for several hours until he finally reached their house. The next story happened in the 90s in a town sat by a white brick house at the top of a small hill. There was a man and his wife lived there. The man was in his 40s or 50s, and the woman was somewhere around the same age, I believe. Anyway, one day while my mother was working at a local gas station where the woman also coincidentally worked at, the man had called her saying that something was wrong with the gas in the house and that he was going to go look at it to see if he could fix it. The gas was located in the basement apparently, and he went down the stairs and laid on his back and crawled under the thing to see what had happened. And he lit a match. As you can imagine, immediately the entire house exploded, sending rubble everywhere and a massive fireball and smoke that could be seen through the town. The man's wife, who saw the explosion from the gas station, ran home to discover that the entire house was gone and there was nothing left of it but its foundations. The man's body, as one might expect in this situation, was blown completely into pieces, with body parts even littering some neighboring houses. Since then, it's become a bit of a local legend that the man's spirit haunts the house that was built on that land where the original one stood. The show Ghost Hunters, or maybe another ghost hunting TV series, I can't really remember, but they actually filmed an episode here because of the experiences by the home's inhabitants, everything from pots and pans rattling and stuff being thrown around to actual manifestations inside the residence. The next story that happened was to my dad's family. They lived up in a series of ridges and hollers, and for the sake of this story, I'll call it Webb, Kentucky. My dad's entire lineage has lived there since the 1800s. I have looked into our family tree, and it is chocked full of history. From an old one-armed Irishman who built the two-story log cabin where my father's family grew up in, and where his grandparents, my great-grandparents, lived out their entire lives, to even some Native American heritage. But where the following story takes place is my uncle's house, which is the two-story log cabin built by the Irishman. My uncle died in 2010 of a massive heart attack on his porch at home, and most of the time it's been empty since then, except for my aunt, my grandma's sister, staying there during the spring and the summer. The house itself has had a history of paranormal activity, from disembodied footsteps coming from the upstairs rooms to voices and apparitions. My whole life, my dad and his sister and brothers had always sweared that the house was haunted by spirits of my great-grandparents, the one-armed man who built the property too, and possibly even my late uncle who died there. But that isn't the only thing that has happened there. You see, in the late 90s or early 2000s, somewhere around that time, my uncle, who loved spending time out in the woods day and night, would go hunting with his pack of hunting dogs, and he was out one night on one of his nightly hunts, and according to my aunt, who heard the story from my uncle, who retold it to my grandparents later on, he was in the woods when something chased him out with great success, and he said that he could hear bipedal walking, tailing him in the woods. His hounds were akin to predators, also seemed frightened and wouldn't chase after whatever it was. He fled through the woods as he heard whatever it was chasing him from behind. He barely made it home by the skin of his teeth apparently, as whatever it was chased him all the way back to the property. And apparently he retold the story to my family a few weeks later while visiting. The next story, my uncle, Dad's eldest brother, had moved back to the mountains after some years away in a nearby city. After remarrying, the family kept up with him from time to time, but he went there on his own and he was doing quite well. However, unfortunately, in mid to late 2016, he was diagnosed with incurable lung cancer and was given only a few short months to a year to live. Seeing as how he didn't want to die in the city, he decided to move back to the hills of home. He spent a little while trying to find a suitable house or trailer to move his family back into, but after a while he finally found one nestled on a very steep hill with a gravel road, and leading up the hill to the house, it sat surrounded by dense dark woods in a backyard that was walled off by a massive rock face with even more woods surrounding it. The house was what I would describe as a log cabin, I guess, with a light brown wood covering the outside and tin or shingled roof. It even had a small hot tub off the side of the small porch, but it had not been used in quite some time, so it was in a bit of disrepair. But in the front of the yard, in a medium-sized garden that the previous owners had made, sat a grave. Yeah, a real one. It was apparently a stillborn infant baby, a fetus who had died in the 1970s and 80s, years prior, and had been buried there ever since. I personally found that extremely odd and a bit unnerving, but the inside didn't fare much better either. Whoever had lived there previously must have left in a hurry, as they left all of their belongings inside. Dishes were left in the kitchen tables. There was a TV, bed frames were tapped together in the bedrooms with only the bedrolls themselves being taken, little girl's clothes and a Minnie Mouse TV stuffed into the closet of a back bedroom, and in the backyard was possibly the strangest sight of all. There was a massive burn pile made up of furniture and pieces of other objects and personal effects, all scorched and burned black with a giant circle of black surrounding the pile, signified by a black outline in the dirt. What I'm getting at is that the whole house had a very eerie and sort of creepy vibe to it, like something was wrong there, very wrong. My father, as a promise to his dying brother, started to work on the house immediately, arranging for satellite TV to be hooked up in the living room, which is where my uncle and his family were forced to sleep while work was underway elsewhere in the house. However, soon this happy abode turned into what was just a living nightmare, apparently. For instance, sleeping in the living room, you would apparently hear footsteps walking across the wooden floors. Doors would close and open by themselves, and shadows were seen too. My uncle started seeing a small boy and an older man in overalls and straw hats who, after a while there, would torment him, even up until his dying day, apparently. His wife, who thought that he was going crazy, never knew anything odd was happening. That was until, at the kitchen sink, she saw a boy in overalls running past the kitchen window. Going outside, there was obviously nothing there, but his daughter, soon after, started experiencing the oddness of the property as she told her mother that she had been playing with a boy in her room just a short time ago, and when going to see what was going on, obviously there was nobody there. My uncle was continually tormented by these spirits too, even locking my family who went to visit him in the back bedroom out of fear that they would hurt them. Eventually, however, they were found to finally flee the home, having been run out by all of the aggressive activity inside the home. My uncle did eventually pass away in 2017, but the entire time that he was there at the home, he was tormented by the restless spirits of the man and the boy, apparently. After his death, the family pastor and another preacher went to the property and blessed it, and even attempted to banish the dark entities haunting the home. They allegedly threw holy water on the walls and front and back doors and ordered the spirits out in the name of Jesus. And after that, no one knows for sure if the property ever had any activity again because no one ever lived in it again. The next story, my father would stay nights at my grandmother's when she was still alive. She died in 2018. Most of the time he would stay with her because she was afraid at nighttime, and as apparently she had some form of sundowners and would see and hear things at night, so he stayed to calm some of her nerves at nighttime. This particular night, her sister was visiting for the week, and he decided to go up and hang out with them for a while, and stayed the night and at about midnight or sometime after that, he was awoken by the sound of the garbage being sort of gone through and a loud thump as whatever it was had kicked the lid off the trash, causing a loud commotion that had awoken my aunt and my grandmother as they got my dad up to investigate whatever the disturbance was. Grabbing my grandfather's old shotgun and a flashlight, he opened up the back door and walked out back to investigate. Having seen the trash can lid on the ground and the trash can being gone through, he walked a little further out through the back area to see if anything was out there. And that was when, apparently, he saw it. Walking back up the hill and back into the woods was a very large and very tall creature, completely in white, with red eyes reflecting the light from the flashlight bouncing off of it. The creature watched him the entire time as it walked back up into the woods, as it vanished into the thicket. My dad walked back inside, white from what he had just seen, completely pale as a ghost. My aunt tried to ask what had happened, and that's when he told her, and they called my mum on the house phone. Relaying the encounter, my mother had my stepbrother try to find any odd encounters from the area and had actually found one. Apparently, a man had reported being followed in the woods while he was walking down that same stretch of the road, and he never saw anything, but whatever it was walking with him every step. It was also later discovered that there's apparently a legend there about the devil himself haunting the woods of the mountains there or something. And now, onto my own personal experiences. So my dad and myself went to the rural country cemetery located in the bowels of the mountains, and this cemetery has been there for at least 80 to 90-ish years. The cemetery sits on a small hill with a very steep road going up, and only a very good truck with four-wheel drive or an off-roading vehicle could make it up there. It's located in between a four-way, with only one home, a double wide trailer located down the hill. It's been empty and for sale for about a year or two now, and was empty during the time of our visit. It has a fence encircling it and 2 pine trees sitting in the middle of it. That is where my family is buried at. My grandmother and grandfather are both buried there, as well as also my uncle, who had the haunted cabin in the previous story. He had his ashes buried there at the foot of my grandfather's vault. 3 other aunts and uncles are also buried there as well as my great-grandparents, but anyway, we got out and went in through the chain-locked gate that you have to pull apart and open from the outside, and we sat there at the grave of my grandparents for about 20 or 30 minutes, just talking. We sometimes liked to walk around the grounds for a little while, and we would usually do this before heading back to town, and today was no different. We walked around looking at the graves from the 17 and 1800s, as well as some Cherokee graves marked by rocks at the very back of the cemetery. However, I found something odd on the ground by the flat grave marker of a grave from the 1800s. It was a large barefoot, at least 2 times larger than my own, and I sat there stunned by what I was seeing because its big toe was extremely large and round in the shape of a quarter, perfectly round. Its arch was very broad and curved, very sharply making the rest of the foot almost look sideways in appearance. Which means that whatever it was there the night prior passing through. I inspected the ground surrounding the rest of the cemetery, and I didn't see any other tracks. Nothing. When I got home, I told my mother what had happened. She seemed to believe me, and my father, considering that I never really lied about anything or seeing anything like that before, and saw the amazement on her face. Sometime later, my aunt happened to be visiting, and I told her about the track that I had found out there, and what she told me was really creepy. She told me that when my other uncle, my father's other brother, was out there visiting the graves years prior, he had come home and said that something was in the cemetery. He said that he had felt watched and was very creeped out being alone back there, and had seen, apparently, a very distinct and strange-looking footprint on one of the graves. Another story is that when my grandmother died in the fall, early winter of 2018, my aunt and uncle had moved into a trailer until they could secure a new home and move back from Tennessee to be closer to family. Many people who stayed the night there while my grandmother was still alive would swear that my grandfather's spirit, who died of cancer under hospice care in the trailer years prior, was haunting the residents because strange footsteps would be heard in the night. Voices and knocking on the trailer walls would always be reported. My father had even encountered said oddities. The knocking would come from outside, and when looking outside or stepping out with a gun, there was never anything there. Prior to my grandmother's passing, my father's only living brother had come to visit her at the trailer one evening and said that he had seen my grandfather standing by her with his arm around her and said, "Son, I'm going to see your mother very soon," and then vanished. And my grandmother did join him a few months later. That was when my aunt and uncle had moved in after, and nothing strange happened. Well, yet, I guess, and eventually they had found a suitable new home to move into, and on cold winter's nights, in the dead of the night, sometimes the power to the trailer would be cut, as you would expect given that after moving and the power bill hadn't been paid yet and all that. But we arrived at the home and began moving them out, and boxes of clothes, TVs, couches, and beds, all loaded into the U-Haul parked in the front yard with the engine running and keys in the ignition. When suddenly, every light source that we had helping us to see suddenly went out. The flashlight that we had hung up on the front porch facing the front door went out, the U-Haul's engine completely died, and we went back out and turned them back on. But a few moments later, it did it again. Everything went completely dark. That's when I could have sworn that I was being followed around while inside the rooms of the trailer. I felt like someone was following me, and I could have sworn at times I could hear a female voice saying hi as well, and also a male voice too, which was also heard by my father while in the living room. This continued on and off, and finally, after everything was loaded into the U-Haul and we regrouped outside, getting ready to leave, and we were talking out the front yard, I swear that I heard someone walking across the hardwood floors in the home. We left a few moments later, and a new family moved in a few months later after that, doing some rehab on the trailer, and as far as we know, no other paranormal activity had been reported since then, but it was surreal and something that I'll never forget. The next story, my father and myself were driving back to town after visiting my aunt, his sister, and my uncle has their trailer. It was late evening, and it was raining, and everything was really muddy and wet. Fog was hovering somewhat over the hills and the ridgelines, and, well, we got to the bend in the round, a little curve about a mile out from their house, when suddenly this woman with short black hair comes walking out of the dense thick woods beside the wood, and my father almost hit her head on and swerved to avoid her. She was wearing a rain jacket and black sweatpants and dirty shoes, and it looked like she had been in the woods all night, and maybe even all week long, because she had mud all over her pants, her jacket, and shirt underneath. She looked soaking wet, and her hair was a complete mess. She looked really disheveled, and she stared at us all the way up the road, just staring, and I even looked back in the rearview mirror. She was still there up to the side of the road looking at us, not even moving back into the woods or walking away. She just stood there the whole time, staring. We never did see her again, but I often wonder what the heck she was doing out there, wet and alone, just completely disheveled like that. I always wonder if maybe she was kidnapped and perhaps something happened to her, but whatever the case, something was definitely off. The next story is my brother's, and my brother and his friend were deer hunting in some woods up in the area close to his home. This was multiple years ago, so nothing recent. But they were going through the woods with their guns when suddenly they spot something up in a tree watching them. This thing jumps from the high vantage point, as it's around 10 or 20 feet high, and falls all the way down to the ground below without even being seriously injured. Apparently it was covered in thick matted hair and it was on two legs. They aimed their guns at it, but apparently this thing screamed at them, though he said that it was more like a roar, and it charged them, and they apparently ran out of the woods as fast as they could, as this thing chased them for quite some time, before finally losing it and getting back home in one piece. And the next and final story is my aunt and uncle's one, and they are the oldest of my mother's family. My uncle actually served in the Vietnam War and was even at one point during his stay overseas, was actually captured along with his brother. They were held hostage by the Viet Cong in the jungles, and he would often tell stories of how they would whip them and beat them and all sorts of merciless stuff and throw feces at them and all sorts of things. But after he returned home, they lived up in the rural area where my mother's family had grown up, and in their whole lives before then, she had moved to the city and started a private in-home nursing and hospice center where my aunt had personally cared for deathly ill patients from dementia to cancer, and she treated them with all respect and kindness. However, around the early 2010s, after she had long since retired and my uncle started to become ill, as well as the organization whom helped get them the house in the first place had foreclosed on them, and they were forced to move into a retirement home by the interstate. It was a high-rise apartment pretty much, located by the interstate. Mostly only elderly and handicapped people were living there. And well, around a few months, maybe a year into their stay there, one night they saw an elderly woman who had Alzheimer's walking across a frozen pond near the building. No one even knew that she was gone, but they watched in horror as the woman fell through the ice and drowned in the lake. No one discovered her body until the next morning, but after that, however, some say that her spirit lingered in the building. My aunt and uncle would often talk about how they would hear footsteps, and one night my uncle had gotten up for something to drink in the middle of the night to see a woman standing there in the middle of the living room. Frightened, he flicked on the light, and as soon as he did, she vanished. This apparently continued for months too, and weeks, as the spirit of this woman haunted their living area. Eventually, though, they were forced to move again after my uncle had dementia for years prior, but it started to progress even more during this time, and just last year he would lose his long battle with this evil disease, and so after that, nobody knows what else happened there. So, these are the strange and weird experiences that I and my family have had living here, and it's a lot, I know, but I hope you enjoyed them, and here's hoping that nothing else weird happens from here on in. It was February 22nd. I was taking a bus home like I usually do. Hung out with my friends after school, so it was like 7 p.m. and dark. I was the only one on the bus until this guy, if I had to guess, in his 30s or 40s, gets on at one of the stops. He looked kind of sketchy, so I didn't look at him much, but he kind of looked like Eminem, I suppose. Anyway, the bus driver stops and is taking a break for something. I don't know, but he says that he can't have us stay on the bus while he's gone. So the sketchy guy gets up, grumbling and swearing to himself about how it's so cold and whatnot. We all get off though, and the sketchy guy and the bus driver go to the Circle K that we're stopped by, and I don't want to stand in the dark by myself, so I follow them. Thing is though, by the time that I go over there, sketchy guy is coming back out already. I'm trying to avoid all eye contact and not get in the way of this guy, but he stops me and starts saying things like, "Look at you, you're not even dressed for the weather. How old are you? You shouldn't be out like this." He then offers me his jacket, which I politely decline, and then starts offering to buy me hot chocolate. I'm getting pretty uncomfortable at this point, so I just say yes and go in with him. He buys the hot chocolate for me and I say thanks, and he just starts ranting about how the bus driver is a terrible person for kicking us off, etc., etc. I'm kind of tuning him out until he says, "If that bus driver leaves without us, I'll chase him to the next stop and put a bullet between his eyes." I was like, wow, okay, what am I even supposed to say to that? He starts making more death threats to the bus driver, till he drops the bombshell and says, "I've done it before, you know. I've killed a man before." I'm just walking there, trying to think of a response to a literal murder confession. The only thing that I could think of at the time was, did he deserve it? And he says, "Oh yeah, he did," and then just doesn't talk to me for the rest of the bus ride. I have no idea what I'm supposed to do with that information. I looked for mugshots from murderers in my area, and there was nothing that looked like him. So, should I tip the police or something? Let them know that, hey, there's a murderer running loose and presumably hasn't been caught yet. I'm pretty freaked out by all of this. I'm not sure if he was trying to scare me or what, but all advice would be really helpful. I'll preface this by saying that we were 12, 13 at the time, and my friend and I often snuck out of either of our houses during sleepovers for late-night walks. This was the basis of this terrifying encounter as well. and it stopped us from ever sneaking out after dark again. My friend lived opposite a huge forest, so her house was the preferred choice to sneak out for us to roam around at night, because the forest was more scary and thrilling, I guess. And we always took flashlights, food, and blankets so we could camp out for a couple of hours before going back home again. Well, on this fateful night, we inadvertently fell asleep instead of staying awake, so when my friend suddenly jolted me from sleep, it was past 3 a.m., which was a lot later than we usually snuck out. We grabbed our essentials and creeped out of the back door into the cold and dark night. Frost crunched underfoot as we crossed the deserted road, and as we reached the entrance to the forest, we noticed how pitch black it was and completely silent too. Unnervingly so, in fact. We turned on our torches, stepped into the uneven path into the forest, the light illuminating the trees swaying in the icy wind. We stepped on fallen, sodden leaves and bark as we made an unsteady but familiar way into our favorite part of the forest, our cold breath the only noise to invade the deafening silence. We reached the small hut that we constructed one afternoon, made entirely of sticks, purely for the purpose of having some shelter for our campouts. There were times that vandals or other kids damaged our hut, but for the most part it stayed intact. But on this occasion, it was completely destroyed, almost like a harbinger of what was to come. We were just deciding to just call it a night and come back later on that day to repair the hut when we heard it. The loud shrieking giggle that made the hair on the back of my neck instantly stand up. My friend and I jumped in shock and looked at each other like, what the heck was that? We were completely freaked out. The eerie and unnatural giggle rang out again, contradicting the silence and making my body break out in goosebumps. "Someone's here," my friend whispered to me, looking utterly terrified. "We have to go now." Her voice of rationale made it even more scary and unnerving to me that someone was in the forest with us at 3 o'clock in the morning. We just looked at each other in assent and took off running in unison, our footsteps navigating the path as naturally as we could from muscle memory, our uneven gasps of air punctuating the giggling that seemed to be following us now, getting closer and closer. Our torch's light went up and down with our fast movements, illuminating random patches of trees and bushes as we finally saw a small sliver of light as we came to the forest entrance. Running out of the forest, we didn't stop until we reached the back door of my friend's house and almost collapsed in a breathless heap of relief to be safe. Then, my friend's eyes went wide and she nudged me, pointing a shaky finger to across the road. A haggard woman of indeterminate age was standing at the forest entrance giggling that awful, horrifying giggle and was now waving over at us. We screamed and ran inside and looked out of my friend's bedroom window through the smallest gap in the curtain and could still see the woman standing there for some time. Worse yet, she was staring right at us, almost as if, I don't know, she knew that we were there somehow. We could tell that she was still giggling that hideous, appalling laugh, and then she just turned, very slowly, and walked back into the forest again. Needless to say, we never went back to that forest, nor went out after dark ever again. So I'm going to start by saying that I'm basically a skeptic when it comes to the paranormal, although I do love hearing stories and listening to others' points of views when it comes to that kind of stuff. This is why I'm having such a hard time, I think, of understanding what happened to me last September. You see, my dad, grandma, grandpa, and I were attending my cousin's wedding in a small rural town just outside of South Haven, MI, late last summer. We rented a small house in town which was located in a very wooded area, just off of a small lake. Something felt extremely off as soon as I got out of the car at our rental property, though. That's the best way that I can describe it too. Something felt off and I was just immediately uneasy. But being the skeptic that I am, I shrugged it off and just chalked it up to being tired and anxious, I guess. The night that we arrived, my dad and I were having a smoke outside and noticed how weird everything sounded. was about 11 p.m. and there was nobody else around. But the trees were crackling incredibly loudly and we were hearing strange animal noises too. But nothing too out of the ordinary, I guess. Just the type of animal noises that you would hear in rural Michigan, I guess. But they just sounded particularly strange to us for some reason. In any case, we said our goodnights and we went to bed. The next morning, my dad told me that he went outside for a smoke at about 2ish that morning and heard what sounded to him like somebody close by banging on metal siding or something. He said that it sounded like it was just next door, but didn't hear anything leading up to or preceding the loud banging, like footsteps or anything like that. We shrugged it off in the end and we just laughed it off. It was the second night, though. It was when I heard the thing that I still cannot stop thinking about 6 months later. It was about 11 p.m. to midnight, and I was having my last smoke of the night. My grandparents were already asleep, and my dad had gotten into bed, but still awake just watching TV. I was sitting on the stairs outside of my back to the house, looking straight out into the backyard, when I heard someone shout my name in a very abrupt manner, loud and quickly. It sounded like they were shouting toward me from the front of the house, like they were standing on the front porch shouting for me, knowing that I was at the back of the house. And it sounded just like my dad, but it couldn't have been him because I didn't hear the front door open or close or anything. Being a skeptic, I reminded myself to stay calm and I quickly walked back into the house. My dad was sound asleep, so there was no way that by the time that I got to him, he could have gotten back into bed. I woke him up in any case and I asked him if he was outside screaming my name. He looked confused and said, "Of course not." I started to get really freaked out at that point. I tried to go to bed, but just couldn't get the scream out of my head. I was up all night trying to figure out what had happened. I was honestly contemplating leaving, getting a hotel room somewhere close by and returning in the morning. Miraculously, I must have fallen asleep sometime around 3 in the morning. We woke up in the next morning and I was so ready to get the heck out of that town. As soon as we left, the uneasy feeling that I had the entire weekend disappeared. When I returned to work the next day, I told my coworker the weird experience that I had. Her face immediately dropped. She proceeded to inform me that this is apparently quite common in the Appalachian area regarding cryptids and other types of creatures. Apparently, they try to get your attention by mimicking someone close to you, and when you look at them, they kidnap you or something along those lines. But I was in Michigan. I tried to look up information about the town that I was in, but I couldn't find anything remotely interesting or related. So I'm wondering, has anyone else had a similar experience to mine? And if you have, what was it? It was April of 2008. I was 20 and living in Denver for a year-long work contract with a non-profit in Boulder. My girlfriend, now wife, and my best friend Tim drove to Colorado from our home state to visit me for my 21st birthday. The non-profit that I was working for housed their workers in dorm rooms and drinking was not allowed on site, nor were visitors allowed to stay overnight. So I booked a hotel in downtown Denver for the weekend where we could drink in honor of my 21st. The hotel was big, very nice and in a safe central area of the city. So nice, in fact, that it was the same hotel that most of the politicians would later stay at during the DNC convention of '08 that took place in Denver later that summer. My wife and Tim, they arrived Saturday morning and we all met up at the hotel. The day was fantastic. We drank across the city most of the day. By about 1 a.m. we got back to the hotel. The room was typical with 2 queen beds. Bed number 1 was close to a big window looking out across the city. Bed number 2 was pushed against the wall with a door that opened to the bathroom. You couldn't see the door or entryway to our room unless you were at the foot of the bed of number 1. But we drank more and chatted in the room until about 4 a.m. My wife was laying at the head of the bed, number 2, flipping through the TV. Tim and I were seated at the foot of bed number 1, staring out of the window as we talked. As we talked, I heard some movement and sound of the door opening. Without looking away from the window, I assumed that it was my wife getting up to use the bathroom. A few minutes passed by and I thought that I heard movement again, so I finally turned around to look. I saw my wife still lounging in bed number 2 as she had been. "Did you get up a few minutes ago and use the bathroom?" I asked her. No," she replied. "I thought that I heard the door," I said back to her, with her just looking confused back at me. "Yeah, I thought that I heard that too," Tim said, breaking his own gaze from the window. It was then that I started to run cold and sobered up pretty quickly. Very softly, I heard Tim say, "Hey, I think that there's someone in our room." I lurched forward from the foot of the bed to look into the pitch-black entryway. I could barely make it out, and I wanted to believe that I was just seeing things, but there was a man, dressed in all black, with a black baseball cap, pressed into the 90-degree corner of the entryway, where the room door and the wall met. Absolute silence fell on the room, and it felt like hours passed by as I started to panic, and in my mind I said, no way have I ever had anything like this in my entire life happen. We all knew. We knew that we weren't alone, and hadn't been for a while as well, and he knew that we had spotted him. Eventually, Tim got the courage to meekly speak in the direction of the corner in the entryway and said, "Hey man, is there something that we can help you out with?" Another period of silence that felt like an eternity went by. He slumped off the edge of the wall a little into the light and made eye contact with Tim and I. We all just stared at each other. Then eventually he spoke up and said, "Is this room 1709? "No man, it's not," Tim said, stroking his beard nervously. He stared at us for a while longer, raising his eyebrows and shaking his head. And then he turned around and left. We then erupted into a million curse words and paced around the room. I called the front desk. They told me that he was drunk and that they found him in the stairwell, but directed him back to the right room. Minutes later, Tim called the front desk and they told him that he was not a guest. He was apprehended in the stairwell, apparently, and taken into police custody. And a while later, they told my wife that he had disappeared, and they had no idea who he was or what he was doing. They told her that there wasn't even a room 1709 in the hotel. We got 3 different stories from the front desk is what I'm getting at, and we still have no idea what it was all about, or how he managed to get a keycard to our room. We were sure the door was closed, in fact. It was easily the most terrifying moment of my life, and always use the latch in the hotel rooms is my advice. We got the stay refunded and about $200 in credit for food from the hotel. We would have sued, but we were young and stupid, and to be honest, we just wanted to get out of there and forget about it. So I was kicked out of my mother's house at 18 and went to live with my uncle and father in Selma, AL. It was an old house that belonged to my grandmother before she passed. My folks used to tell me stories when I was younger about the house, saying that it was haunted or something and was once a slave house. Selma has a history of slavery and even was once called Slave City, so I believe the stories. But there was even a rumor, though, that a witch lived in the house before my grandmother. It's also rumored that my grandmother's brother even dated a woman who was said to be a witch, and apparently she put candles around the doorsteps with a chicken with its head cut off in the middle or something. I've had family members tell me about their stories of seeing and hearing paranormal activity around the house, but at this point, I had never witnessed anything myself, so I thought that they were all just superstitious and paranoid. Anyway, after a while, I moved into my father's old room, and he warned me that one day I'll start hearing voices. I had a dog at the time, and he even warned me that one day my dog would die. His exact words were a bit more cryptic than that though, but I got the drift. He said they'll either kill you or the dog. I laughed, thinking that he was just joking, to be honest. He told me that my aunt was secretly a witch and that I couldn't trust my uncle. He also told me that if something starts calling for you to come outside the room at strange times, it's not real. I laughed at him even more then because I remembered other family members saying that he was crazy and talked to himself sometimes. Despite his claims, everything seemed okay for a while though. One day I was preparing to leave Selma for a job interview in Montgomery. My aunt saw me dressed up and asked where I was headed. I told my aunt, who was living there at the time too, that I was going to take a nap and I was heading to Montgomery afterward for a job, an interview. Hours later, I walked out of the house to find that my front tire was slashed. All of a sudden, my aunt appeared out of nowhere and asked what happened. And this was a bit strange to me. She was acting unusual, but I didn't question it. Luckily, I had a spare in the back of my Jeep. I fed my dog and left for Montgomery, and it was dark when I came back to Selma hours later. My uncle, though, said that my dog was dead, and he didn't know what happened to it, and that they had already buried him too. I felt some type of way about my dog mysteriously dying, so I asked my aunt's kids who were always outside playing what happened, and one of the kids told me that they beat the dog and kicked it until it stopped moving. Now, I have never heard this child talk like this, and he was really serious about it. Well, at least he seemed to be. Didn't blink or laugh while saying it. At this point, I knew something was wrong with my folks, and my father randomly came over to the house the next day. Before I could say anything about the dog, he said, "I told you that they were going to kill it." He also said that he saw my uncle talking to some Mexicans who were known for doing voodoo when he passed by late last night. Again, though, I just laughed it off because my father was always a joker. But deep inside, I was starting to get very worried, I have to admit. In any case, the next day, as soon as I woke up, I had this weird, unrealistic feeling. Then I heard my father call my name from outside the house. He called me by my nickname that he used to call me as a kid when he first lived in my grandmother's house. I was about to go out too when I remembered what he said. If something starts calling for you to come outside the room at strange times, it's not real. I paused for a few seconds, then swung the door open, but as he said, nobody was there. It was very early in the morning. My father was more than likely at work. And 2 days later, I woke up at 3 in the morning, walked outside of the house because I felt weird. As I walked around the outside of the house, I heard sounds like birds swooping over my head. When I looked up, I saw nothing but black shadows flying everywhere. I looked to the sky and the moon was so close to the earth that it might as well have been a giant eyeball staring right at me. A few days after that, the people from the job interview called back and said that I got the job. I was supposed to start next week. Later that night, though, I felt a presence in the room with me as I tried to sleep. It felt negative, so I put my headphones in and played some positive music. But even with the music playing, the presence felt like it was getting stronger and stronger. Somehow, too, my left earbud fell out of my ear, and it was then that I heard a dog or a wolf or something like that growling in the room. I could even feel the vibration of the growling. I instantly got up and left the house, and I didn't come back until the morning that night. Later in the week, I was preparing to leave the house so that I could live with my family in Montgomery for the job. I had gathered all of my things and was ready to go. I sat back on the bed to get a short rest before I hit the road, when all of a sudden, it sounded like something was running up to the side of the bed, and something grabbed my hair and yanked it. The force literally almost pulled me off the side of the bed. It was then that I left in that moment, and after that, I swore to myself that I would never be back, and I have never gone back since. December 3rd, 2022. It was around 10 p.m. My daughter was asleep on the sofa. I took her up to bed. She was sleepwalking again, and she said, "Stop it, Dad." I said, "I haven't done anything, Kelly." I laughed, and she had stopped in her tracks. and then had this odd sort of bent forward posture with her arms stretched down to her sides with her fingers spread out and said, "I'm not Kelly," but in a sort of old woman's voice with a deliberate pause before she said her name. "Of course you're Kelly, silly," I replied, and laughed. She then carried on walking half asleep to her bedroom. She got into her bed and closed her eyes. I kissed her on her head and I said, "Love you, Kelly." She started to fidget in her bed and with her eyes still closed, announced, "I said, I'm not Kelly." The same old woman's voice and a pause before her name, and also now a bit of irritation in her voice. Then I realized this wasn't my daughter mimicking someone. This may be somebody else. I got goosebumps up and down my arms and said, with a little stutter in my voice, "If you're not Kelly, then who are you?" My daughter then opened her eyes, lifted her head, and adjusted herself to be eye to eye with me, and started to stare intensely into mine with these matte black eyes with no color, then put herself back on her pillow, shut her eyes, and just instantly went back to sleep. I woke her up and it was like I'd awoken her from a deep slumber. I said, "Kelly, are you okay?" She says, "Yeah, Dad. Why did you wake me?" I said, "Oh, nothing, just checking that you're okay," and then asked her to pray with me, which she did with no issues, maybe a little bit of confusion. Then I kissed her on the head, said that I loved her, and I left her to go back to sleep. The next day, I had to drop a parcel to my neighbors next door. The brother and the sister opened the door. I gave them their parcel. Then I asked how they were because their mother had died in the summer. And I said, "Do you feel like your mum is about it all?" The daughter replied, "Oh yeah, they feel her presence a lot, and that they also had seen a ghost out on the fields in front of our house of a young girl, 6 years old, who had died on a playing area that used to be there." She then told me that she and her mother used to regularly use a Ouija board to contact the little girl, and had done this many times, speaking to her, and the little girl had replied saying that she is protecting the area so other children don't get killed there. And also a friend of the family who had died and was still visiting them in spirit form apparently, dressed in a hood, and was seen moving through their rooms at night to check on them. I replied that I don't really mess with that stuff, and I just said my goodbyes to them. But I left with a really sick feeling in my stomach. 2 days later, I was going to bed for an early shift at work. I went to bed at 11 p.m. and went straight to sleep. And suddenly I awoke, but I had my eyes shut, and in my head I heard myself say, "There's somebody in the room." I opened my eyes, and in the dark, I could see a man with white hair and black glasses, working on a device pressing into it, where my wife's side of the bed is. I jumped back, shocked, and I started to get out of bed. I turned my head away just for a brief moment, and when I looked back, he was gone. It was a real person, though, totally solid and real to look at. I wasn't scared at that time. I guess I was just completely bewildered. I laid back down after getting a drink of water and went back to sleep somehow, and then again it happens. I'm suddenly awake with my eyes closed, and once again my mind is telling me that somebody is in the room. I open my eyes. This time, it's more sinister though. To my right, at the side of the bed where my wife sleeps, there's a creature with matte black eyes staring at me. In fact, the eyes reminded me of how my daughters looked a few days before. Whatever it was around 4.5 feet tall and seemed like a mixture of maybe a gargoyle and a gremlin with no wings, and long pointed ears that pointed straight up, nostrils like a gorilla's. Its skin was dark green and leathery with light orangey sort of brown tips going down its arms. It was looking straight at me with a mouth that seemed to be frothing on one side, and it looked very old, exhausted almost, very hungry perhaps, and was slowly panting while looking in my direction. I slowly got out of bed, not taking my eyes off of it for a second, and slowly walked around the bed towards it, and noticed that It had very long arms, with what looked like 5 clawed sort of fingers on each hand. The way that it was standing reminded me of the bent forward posture that my daughter had had earlier in the week, with the arms hanging down to its sides. I also noticed when I was moving from the bed, its gaze did not follow me. It seemed to be just looking to where I had been sleeping, and as I got a little closer, maybe 5 feet away, it then just disappeared from the room. Like it just was here in reality and then all of a sudden it was gone. Not like it faded, but more like it just blinked out of reality. Well, obviously I was scared now, and after that I didn't get any more sleep. The next 2 weeks were fine, but from late December 2022 into now February of 2023, I have started to have real trouble sleeping. I feel like I'm constantly being watched, but also I feel an icy cold wind blows on my neck, around my spine and knees sometimes. My wife and the rest of my family are just fine. Me, I get really cold in areas of my body around my neck and knees and face, especially between my eyes and nose. If I'm lucky, I'll have like 1 to 2 days of good sleep and then a couple of days of bad sleep, maybe 2 hours sleep each day. I've seen a doctor and I've had a urine and blood test, and they've all come back fine. I've been given sleeping tablets and I have been taking calming tablets. They do help, but it's still happening and I'm getting cold and sometimes feeling like, I don't know, something's here, watching. I also saw a vicar and had myself blessed, and also a crucifix and a Holy Bible blessed as well. And when I went around the house saying the Lord's Prayer and then telling it to leave by the power of God and Jesus, that seemed to help for 1 day. The house got very positive and light and I slept really well, but the next day I had terrible sleep again and it was almost like back to square one. I really don't know what to do. It's really disturbing me for obvious reasons, but to other people it probably just sounds like a bad horror film. I know that. I don't know if I'm going crazy. I don't know if I'm actually seeing something. I don't know why my daughter said what she said during her sleepwalking, but it feels real to me, and there have been other small things starting to happen, which even my other family members have noticed too, which makes me believe that I'm not going crazy. Something is actually happening. I was about 8 or 9 and lived in a small town in Alabama where everyone knows everyone. We lived in a subdivision of duplexes. The front of the neighborhood had a small rent office with the tenants' mailboxes outside on the wall. My favorite task was going to get the mail. This particular day, my sister, 5 or 6 at the time, asked to go with me. Our duplex was right behind the office, up at the top of the grassy hill. The backside of our home faced the office, so my sister and I would get to the mailbox, and as I'm removing the mail, a white middle-aged couple, irrelevant, I'll explain, pulled up in front of the building. This being Alabama in the 80s, our neighborhood was all black. The white people lived on the other side of the railroad tracks. I knew a lot of them as most families were here for generations, but I'd never seen this couple. The woman on the passenger side rolled down her window and said, "Excuse me, can we ask you all a question? We need directions." And I knew about stranger danger, so just planned to ignore them. My sister was starting to walk to the car window though, as my back was partially turned, locking the mailbox. I ran and grabbed her hand and said run to the house. She tried to ask why as the woman continued calling us to the car. I raised my voice and said, "Get up the hill now." She started running up the hill. I turned to follow when the driver, a male, opened his door and in an angry voice said, "Get back here now." At this point, my sister was up the hill. I started running up the hill, and when I got to the top, I saw that the driver was standing a few feet from the bottom of the hill. I started to laugh and said, "Ha ha, I beat you. You're too slow." I even stuck my tongue out. He turned and walked back to his car. My mother was not home, don't remember where she was at, but I went into the house and stupidly never mentioned this incident until I was much older. I was around 15 or 16 when I remembered, and understood the actual danger that I had been in that day. My mother was shaking when I finally told her. I'm not going to say where since I'm still in the area, but we're at a vacation in somewhere in Europe. Me and my sister and my sister-in-law were skating and were approached by this British lady asking how to get into the ice rink. I, having watched and read so many murder mystery documentaries and posts, immediately had a bit of a bad feeling, since the kiosk that you have to pay for renting shoes is facing the rink. I mean, you can't miss it. And there were so many people there, but that couple came straight to us, 3 vulnerable women. I ignored it and kept skating with my sister and sister-in-law. However, we were roped into a conversation with this woman. I came over to listen in, and all she was saying is how pretty they are and urging them to take off their sunglasses so that she can get a better look at them, and asking their ages and where they worked. This just sort of confirmed to me too that something was up. Before I could say anything, she turned to me and went, "Oh my goodness, you look like a model. You should work for Chanel," and this definitely confirmed it even more to me that it just smelled like BS, calling a 4-foot woman a model just to stroke her ego. Her husband then walks over to us right after, stares really creepily at me, offers a handshake, and proceeds to call me a Kardashian. At this point, I wanted to signal to my sisters to leave immediately, but the lady goes, "Oh my goodness, we should all take a picture." I shook my head, told my sisters in Arabic that they're bad news and we should leave. I left, but my sister was very gullible, enough so to agree to take the picture. Moments later, I told my dad about what had happened and how creeped out I am by the whole situation and how those 2 have my sister's pictures. My dad and I decided to walk over to them to have them delete the pictures. As we approached them, I could see that the guy that took the pictures had the photos selected and seemed to be in the middle of sending them to a WhatsApp group chat, which obviously made my heart drop to my stomach after hearing about some trafficking stories. After we asked them to delete the pictures, the man looked sort of flabbergasted and fidgety, kept saying how he's not offended and how lucky I am to have a father so caring to worry about us like this. His whole speech before he allowed me to delete the pictures was weird, to be honest. I genuinely still feel like to this day that we were targeted by traffickers. This was back in 2016. I moved to Iowa, which I had lived in Illinois all my life. I lived with my mum's friend and her kids, and they were pretty religious, so I was sent to a Catholic school with her kids. It was probably a 15 to 20 minute walk from our house to the school, and we walked that every morning and afternoon. I don't think that there were any buses at the school, which is why we walked in the end, but there were 6 of us, 4 of them older than me and 1 younger than me. I don't really remember why the 3 of the older brothers didn't walk with us, but they didn't. So it was my friend, who I had lived with, and she's older than me, her younger brother, and me. We were walking home like normal, and there were a lot of stores around. I vividly remember the Hy-Vee, which was halfway between home and school. We were almost there when this random guy sort of stopped us. He was wearing shorts and a t-shirt, nothing abnormal. He asked us if we had a phone that he could use because he was in deep trouble. We did, but not for him, obviously. So we declined and said that he could probably use one at a store. He was pretty frantic though and told us that we couldn't move. We were in middle school, so it was pretty terrifying at the time. He had jumped into the street after and tried opening car doors as well. It was a pretty busy street. People were getting off work and out of school, and once he turned his back, I grabbed my friend and her brother, and we just ran. People pulled over and asked if we were okay. They blocked his view of us so we could go home. We talked to the police and filed a report, but I don't think that anything ever happened to the guy. I moved a few months after, back to Illinois, but I think about this guy pretty much every day. I don't know who he was, if he got caught, or what would have happened if he got a car door open. I'm just glad that my friends and I made it home okay. So I currently live in the United States, but out of college I took a job in Australia on a horse farm. Then I was 21 and this was my first major job and I loved it. When I arrived, I moved into the original home on the property, which was smack dab in the middle of 400 acres. It was close by to the main house and the barns, but fenced and had considerable privacy, and no one ever bothered us. During my time there, we had an influx of seasonal workers coming and going, and the owner travelled frequently to other farms and overseas, so much of the time I would be left alone on the property in the evenings. The house itself was a moderate-sized ranch, with 3 bedrooms, 1 bath or shower, and a laundry room. We mainly used the back sliding glass door to come and go from the house. From the day I moved in, the sliding glass door rollers were broken. It was old and heavy glass, and you had to lift it and push hard to open it. But the back entrance went to the garden, and it had nice views, and it's where we frequented for tea breaks and stuff. Now, as soon as I moved in, I immediately got feelings of being watched, but I wasn't hearing anything. A few weeks after the move, I had an almost lucid dream. I was laying in bed when I looked up, and at the foot of my bed stood a woman in a full-length dress, purple lace, high neck and sleeves. The woman looked middle-aged, maybe late 40s or 50s. Her hair was pinned up in a bun on top, and the only way that I knew that she was upset of my presence was the look on her face. She looked like she just wanted me out. She didn't say anything, didn't move, just stood there staring, and suddenly I awoke and she was gone. I had this dream too, many times while I lived there. The only thing that changed was her face. It seemed to soften the longer that I was there, but occasionally she looked angry or upset. After a time, I believed that she presided in the home with us and was just there. She didn't seem to do much around the house other than watch and show up in dreams. And she actually has little to do with this story, other than to give context to what I believe was in the house up until this point. But let's fast forward to 5 months later. All of my previous housemates have left and it's just me in the house now. I had a nice day at work on the farm. It was a busy and bustling day, lots of people on the property. It was winter in Australia, if you want to call it that. But the days were a bit shorter. I climbed into bed at around 8, which was normal for me, and usually I just sort of sit there with my laptop and play games, browse the web, or make calls home to family in the US. So I've been in bed for probably about an hour at this point, just relaxing. It's dark out now when suddenly I hear the sliding glass door push open and someone take 4 heavy steps into the house. It sounded like heavy work boots, and it actually shook the house a bit. Everything went suddenly quiet and I absolutely freaked. I jumped up and grabbed whatever I could find, which happened to be an old heavy shot glass. We didn't have a lot of cups there and I'm not a big drinker. It's just what we had. And my alarm clock, which is one of those old ringing ones with a hammer between 2 bells. I guess I figured that I'd throw stuff at the intruder. I mean, no one ever entered the house without a knock or at least a call out. And after a few minutes of getting my nerve up, I entered the hallway and walked into the kitchen. But there was no one there. No person, no boots, and the sliding glass door was closed. I never heard it close though, only open, and it makes a distinct sound. I opened the sliding glass door and called out. I grabbed a flashlight and beamed it around looking for anyone. I was panicking and looking for answers, so I desperately called the farm manager to see if he had stopped by at all, and he answered, and panicking I asked if he had been there, and he said no. I said, well, maybe the owner had stopped by looking for me, and he corrected me. He said that the owner was with him and that they were 2 hours away at the races, and that there should really be nobody else on that property. At this point, I was very unnerved, and I spent the next 4 hours calling family overseas and unable to sleep. Many weeks after this, I ran into one of the old farmhands who had left prior to this event, and he mentioned that he didn't have a real bed while he stayed at that house. We kind of laughed about it, and I was like, you should have asked for a bed frame or something. He slept with the mattress on the floor. The room that he stayed in was right off the kitchen and directly across from the sliding glass doors. And somehow we got onto the topic of the kitchen light being left on at night. I was always first to bed, so I never turned it off, and even after everyone left, I just continued to leave it on, not thinking about it. At least not consciously, maybe subconsciously, I guess. But he mentioned that he never turned it off either, and in fact would always turn it on before heading to bed if it wasn't already. But when I asked why, he said that it was because he often heard footsteps in the kitchen, and he could even see a light under his bedroom door and wanted to see if anybody was there. He never saw shadows or anyone else in there for that matter, but it was creepy to hear that this guy, he had such a similar experience to the one that I did. So, I'm an only child, and it must have been about, 6 in the morning. It was on a Sunday though, and I was in my living room watching cartoons with both my parents asleep, when I hear a knock at the door. It was a pretty Latina woman in her 30s holding a large cardboard box. I'd never seen her before. There's a big white van pulled up in the street in front of my house with a man in the driver's seat. She told me the box is for my parents and asked if they were home. I told her yes, but they're asleep. She said, "Oh, that's okay. I can come back later." But that she had something for me too, and it's in the car. She asks if I could come help her get it out, and I'm lucky, I guess, because I just started kindergarten and we had just had the stranger danger talk just a couple of days before this. I told her, maybe later when my parents are awake. Bye. And I shut the door on her face. Immediately I told my parents and, well, they didn't believe me. A couple of years later, I told them the exact same story and they realized then that I didn't make it up. To this day, they have no idea who that woman could be based on my description. My dad had a pretty bad addiction at that time and hung out with a lot of questionable people, so I wonder if word spread around that he had a daughter or that maybe someone had just happened to notice by watching the house or something. I guess I'll never know, but thankfully they never came back. So, I, a 21-year-old female, had a pretty scary experience with my husband. This happened about a year and a half ago, I think now. And I've always been a huge paranormal fanatic. I would always find places to go explore that were known to be haunted, which means that I do have a lot of stories, but this one is by far the most scary. In my home state, there's this abandoned asylum on the outskirts of downtown in a pretty sketchy area. The building was originally a mental health facility in the 40s, and was eventually made into a drug rehab center, and finally a boys' home where it would eventually shut down in the 80s. It's a relatively small building, I suppose. Only 2 stories, and maybe 8 rooms on each floor, and 1 large room on both floors on the far side of the building. All the windows are busted out. But the building has a history filled with tragedy and has a well-known reputation of being haunted. Now, I've been to the building on a handful of occasions, but had never been on the bottom floor due to flooding. I had never had any experiences there, except maybe a feeling of unease, I suppose. There was a day that I had asked my husband if we could go. He was hesitant at first, as we had been there a few months before. We usually went every 6 months just for fun. But he eventually agreed and said that he wanted to go at 3 a.m. And me being me, I agreed with him. So, 2 a.m. rolls around and we're at the asylum with our baseball bats, for protection, As I mentioned, it's a bit of a sketchy area, and occasionally we would run into homeless people sleeping there, so it was just a precaution. I also had brought a Ouija board and an EMF reader. This time that we visited, the water at the bottom floor had drained out, and I was very excited to finally go down there and explore it a bit. We started upstairs and swept the whole building, making sure that nobody was there, of course. While sweeping the bottom floor, I didn't have any feelings of unease, but I was a little bit freaked out to see satanic symbols and dead birds on the floor. At this point, I'd figured the downstairs hadn't been flooded for a few months, as there was a lot of graffiti and the dirt on the floor was very dry as well. We started on the upstairs with candles and the Ouija board and tried to make contact for nearly an hour, but there was nothing. Nothing on the EMF, nothing from the board. At this point, my husband and I were just sort of messing around because we weren't expecting anything to happen, to be honest, just having fun. We moved downstairs, and by that time it must have been about 3 a.m. I was feeling fine at first too, and we did a few sessions on the Ouija board in different areas of the lower floor. I had asked to stay away from the large back room as the satanic symbols had made me feel a bit uncomfortable, I guess. After the sessions, we walked around with the EMF detector, and I noticed that it was only spiking in the spots that we had the Ouija board sitting. My husband and I were pretty weirded out by that, but we just kind of blew it off and thought that there was maybe an explanation and we'd figure it out later. And it was at this point that my husband decided that he wanted to go to the back room. I said that it was fine as long as he stayed close to me, and we made a little more than maybe halfway when I just started to get this gut feeling to not go any further. Every hair on my body was standing on end, and I told my husband that we needed to go, and I noticed that he was on edge as well. I ended up running down the hall back to the outside, alone, and that was really unlike me, to go anywhere alone in the dark, as I'm terrified of it, but this feeling was just too much for me. When my husband and I were both back in the car and I calmed down, he explained to me that he had felt the most evil feeling that he'd ever felt since a previous haunting he'd dealt with. We were both pretty freaked out, and we decided that we were done for the night and we just wanted to go home. Now, it must have been about 3 nights later. I had woken up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. When I was coming back from the bathroom, I had a really weird feeling, but I wasn't completely awake, so I just sort of ignored it. When I reached the bedroom and closed the door behind me, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. I looked over to the corner of the room and I saw a hunched shadow figure, not much taller than like 5.5 feet. I stared for a second, sort of trying to adjust my eyesight, but eventually I just told myself that I was half asleep and I must be sort of seeing things, and went back to bed feeling a little uneasy. Now, it was about a week later when my husband asked to talk to me, and he told me that he had seen something in the bedroom that night that I'd gotten up to use the bathroom as I'd woken him up getting out of bed. He began describing what he saw, and I was in utter disbelief because we had both seen the exact same thing. Needless to say, we were both pretty scared after that, and I think our fear fed more into the situation. It went to us seeing the figure almost every other night, to our ankles being grabbed and things being moved around and found out of place for the next few weeks. There came a point too when I was so fed up with everything that I smudged with 2 different smudge sticks and very angrily told it to leave us alone. And after that, it just went away, gone, like it never even happened. To this day, I believe that it followed us home from the asylum that night, as we've never had issues in our house before and always left the Ouija board in the car. I had a strict rule about it coming into the house. And to this day, we have not returned to that asylum either. Even thinking about it over a year later, I can still feel the pit in my stomach of when I felt the evil that we experienced that night. This is a bit of a strange one, I'll admit, but I would like to get your opinion on it. So last year, me and my girlfriend decided to go camping, as we were sick of being inside. So we packed our stuff and off we went into the wild. The first 2 days were great. We found a great spot and set up camp. We roasted s'mores, birdwatched. It was amazing. And well, the third day we were at the nearby lake watching a flock of ducks swim around on the water. We were at a picnic table just kind of talking when a girl approached us. She was young, maybe 15 or 16. She told us that her father had fallen and that she needed someone's help. We offered to call for help, but she said that he wasn't badly hurt and just needed someone strong to help get him up. We agreed, as my girlfriend knew first aid and we had a kit with us. So she led us into the forest along a trail until we got to a point where she said that they had gone off a trail because they had seen a certain bird and her father was an avid bird watcher. We were reluctant, I'll admit, but here was a little girl needing help with her father, so we did go after her. We reached her father eventually and, well, something just was not right about it. You see, he was on the ground like he had fallen, but he was old, like 70 at least, which was weird because she was like 16. She called him her father, not grandfather as well. In any case, she stayed up on a little ridge with my girlfriend while I went down and helped him out. I asked if he was hurt bad and he said no, and that they were okay now and that we could leave. I remember looking up at my girlfriend, who was staring at this girl as if trying to telepathically communicate something to her, but she was looking at her father, and we helped him up to the trail, walked in silence while the girl talked about the birds that we saw until we got back to it, and once there, they both turned and just sort of stared at us, telling us that we could leave now. It was altogether a really strange situation, just a weird vibe all around. I really don't know how to describe it, but it was like the man didn't want her to go and get help or something, but since she had, he was trying his best to get us away from them the quickest way possible. Once we got back, we alerted the local authorities, but I don't think anything ever came of it. Once we got back home, my girlfriend looked into missing child cases from the area, but didn't find anything. But what if she wasn't from there, and he had taken her from somewhere else? Looking back now, I feel like we should have asked more questions because the whole thing was just so strange. But we didn't, and honestly, I regret that. So just for the record, before I tell you guys what happened, I just want to say that this is the weirdest thing that has ever happened to me, and I have no idea what happened this night. So, I was drinking with my brother one night. The weather was bad, so the bars were closed and the streets were gross. But we stepped out onto his front porch for a smoke, and that was when we saw him. A man. But not just an ordinary man. This guy honestly looked a bit like a zombie. He was groaning and dragging one leg behind him, and my brother and I watched, sort of puzzled as he got closer. Thinking that it was a joke or maybe he was high or something, we just looked at each other and then back at the man. Then I looked behind him, and the tracks that he were leaving were in the snow, and he had definitely shuffled like this down the entire street. Stunned in silence, my brother and I just sort of watched on as he slowly made his way closer. Neither of us moved. We didn't really want to be honest. I guess we were a little bit frightened, but also very curious. But then he stopped. His head sort of snapped to look at us all of a sudden, and the sound that came out of this guy was unlike anything I've ever heard before. It was something that I'd never even heard in like horror movies or anything. My brother and I looked at each other though, threw our cigarettes down and ran inside. We got into his apartment and he grabbed a knife, I grabbed a fry pan. Don't judge me, it was the first thing that I saw that I could arm myself with. But we stood ready and watching, waiting for the fight of our lives with patient zero, and then just nothing. We waited, listened, we pepped each other up and eventually opened the door. We stepped out on the porch together and we looked everywhere, but nothing. This guy was gone. But the weirdest thing is that his tracks just ended where we last saw them. We searched and searched that area and he was nowhere to be found. No footmarks, no continuation of that creepy drag mark, nothing. In fact, I would almost say that it looked like the guy just flew away. So, I was on my way to work, just as normal as any other day really. Same time, same route, same music, same coffee. In fact, I almost made it there too. In all honesty, I don't remember what made me drive off the road and into a ditch totaling my car like that. I don't remember the crash. I swear to this day that I made it to the next stop sign and got behind a black Dodge Challenger and made the next right turn behind it as well. It must have been an out-of-body experience because my car and I were in a ditch 20 to 30 feet before that stop sign. Fast forward, I woke up in the hospital disoriented and confused. I had never been in a hospital bed staring at the ceiling before, so I guess I was asked the routine questions. Do you know where you are? And me being me, I said something like, it's not heaven, I probably wouldn't be going there, so I guess a hospital? Do you know why you're here? And for the love of all that's good, I just could not remember one single bit of it. I legitimately thought that I made it to the stop sign. I didn't even know that I had a car accident. So I said, oh, no, well, what happened? Is there anyone you'd like for us to contact? I didn't remember that I was married, much less remember the name of my spouse. But it was at this moment when I looked up and saw at the foot of my bed 3 large shadows. There was one officer at the window to my left, 2 nurses on my right between the bed and the wall, and the doctor was at my hip to my left. I asked, why so many people? And the doctor said that the nurses had to be there and the cop had to do a report. I pointed at the shadows at the foot of my bed, but they were now gone. The doc confirmed that there's nobody there, but still dazed and confused, the officer now standing at my hip and the doctor at the foot of the bed told me that I was in a car accident. So I asked if there was anybody else injured, people in the other vehicle, walking pedestrians, if maybe I hit an animal or something. But no, just you. It was just you is what they told me. I try to be a good person, so maybe it was the relief that I didn't hurt anyone else. I started to cry and the officer kindly wished me a speedy recovery and made his way out. I sort of wiped away my tears and opened my eyes and, like the worst jump scare in a 3D movie, there was an old man in my face repeatedly saying, "Help me," and I just froze up. I felt my heart skip a beat, hair stood up on my arms, legs and neck. I sensed my blood pressure drop and the heart monitor made its noise. Trying to evaluate the situation as best as I could, as quickly as I could, I looked around, and the nurses who were to my right just a moment ago were gone. I must have missed the moment that they left, but to my left was the old man, and it wasn't just him anymore. There were 4, what I can only describe as phantoms, screaming at me for help, 3 male and 1 female. The nurses rushed back in because of the beeping machine attached to me, and at that, I passed out. When I woke up, there was a surgeon telling me the extent of my injuries, which they're not really relevant to this story, but I asked him to send up the hospital priest, and he tried to press for information as to why I wanted the priest, but I simply told him that I wanted someone to pray for me. And after that, again, I passed out. The time lapses between sort of passing out and waking up here were never clear to me, but sometime I woke up again and the priest was there with me. He stood to my right in plain clothes, asked why I wanted him there, and I asked him to close the door. After he did, I told him everything that I saw. The shadow people, the old man, and the other 3 with him asking for help. I asked the priest to pray for any lost souls, to bless the room that I laid in, and to bless me with holy water. He told me that he understood my concern, and would pray for me and come back to check on me later. I spent another 3 weeks laying in that hospital bed, passing out and waking up, and after making a full recovery, I've gone back to the hospital to visit the cathedral and thank that priest. I don't know if the prayers by the priest helped or not. I don't know what happened that night. All I can hope is that whatever he said, well, helped those poor people who were screaming for help. So this happened about 6 years ago in a very rural town at a gas station. By very rural, I mean drive over an hour before you even see signs of civilization. I was 16 and I needed a job, and so I applied and was immediately hired at the gas station. I was supposed to work the night shift with another co-worker, Jules, until I got the hang of everything, that is. The first 3 nights were quiet. 2 customers max each night, and we spent most of our time talking about college. On the 4th night, around 11, we got our first customer, John. Now, everyone in town knew John, for he had some sort of brain damage and was effectively 6, but he was pretty big. We both knew that John liked Jules and thought that he was just great. He was sweet and funny, and on this night he had brought $10 and wanted a Snickers and Gatorade, which we gave him. He sat at a table that was out and started snacking while telling us about his new kitten. And after about 30 or 40 minutes, we got our second visitor, who would turn our lives upside down. He was a man in his 30s or 40s. He had black hair and a leather jacket, and he looked a bit like a greaser. He wanted a beer, which were locked up in another room and required someone to go and get it. Since I was new, Jules went to go and get him one. The man said hi to John and me and started trying to strike up conversation about school. Pretty soon he started to steer the convo towards more inappropriate things, I guess. Which, since I was 16 years old, a female, I found weird. He wanted to know if I had a boyfriend, if I was a virgin or not, what kind of things I liked. I silently prayed that Jules would soon hurry up and return, and after dodging his questions for like 10 minutes, finally she did. She gave him his drink and he paid. But he didn't leave. He started talking to her about the same things that he had with me. She was 18, still young, but was older than me. Thus she was more bold, I guess. So she shut him down and asked him to please leave. But then he told us that he needed gas, and so she unlocked one of the pumps and he went outside to get his gas. But 5 minutes later he returns, and it's apparently not working. He asks if one of us could go and help him out. Jules volunteered, but before she left she handed me the keys. I wasn't allowed them since I was new, but there was a piece of folded up paper there as well. On the paper it read, "Lock the doors and keep the lights on." I don't know if this is true for everywhere, but where we were, if the gas station lights were all on, including signs and decorations, something was up. It was a sign to call the cops, and she leaves with him, and I lock the door but stay by the window so I can see them. John joins me and starts asking questions like, what's happening? Where's Jules? Who is that guy? I explained the best that I could that I didn't know, and that if something happened, he needed to run away very fast and get help. It had been maybe 20 minutes by now, and I couldn't see either of them. They were on the side of the truck facing away from the windows. The worst situations were popping up in my head, and I'm starting to freak out a bit, but suddenly Jules appears and I unlock the door to let her in. The guy's truck peels out of there and I lock the door again. She tells me that the guy had grabbed her butt and told her that she should come home with him, and of course she told him to get lost or she would call the cops. We spend about 15 minutes calming down, and eventually we all leave together. I quit the next morning and I got a new job, but Jules stayed. It was about a month later too that it was on the news that she had been assaulted by a guy who came in late at night. They never did catch the guy, and Whenever I go back home, I see her and we talk about that night. And she assures me that it was the same guy. She is doing good now and has a husband and a daughter, and John moved to Cali with his mum and cat. But I guess I'll never forget that night. And these days, whenever I go to a gas station or pass one, I always check to see if all the lights are on. So earlier today, I wanted to get out of the house a bit. It's been raining here for like almost a week off and on, and so once I saw that it was going to be sunny, I decided that we should go to the beach. I left my phone behind, which isn't unusual for me because I have a bad habit of dropping it at the beach or on hikes. We got to the beach and park, and I see a dog in a car parked near us, and I call to my girlfriend to show her. As she approaches, her phone rings, and I see on the caller ID my name and number. She asks if I accidentally pocket dialed her, and instinctively I sort of reached for my heaviest pocket, which had my wallet in it. But I reached and I remembered that I left my phone. I stop cold and tell her my phone is on the couch at home, and she picks up and hears a deep voice speaking through static. I have a pretty deep voice, but she told me that she couldn't really tell who it was or what it was saying before it hung up. She calls back and it rings twice and goes to voicemail. Now, I'm pretty freaked out by this because, you see, when we first met years ago, I had just moved to this town, and I swear that I saw myself on the street jogging. I ended up chasing this person but couldn't catch them. I kept yelling trying to get their attention, but they just kept going, putting more and more distance between us. I stopped and some nearby people commented on my twin that I was racing. This further cemented what I saw that day, and it 100% was me that I was chasing. And now this? And when we got home, my call log, it didn't have a history of a call outgoing. But also, it didn't have the call she returned either, which was definitely my phone. I have no idea what's going on. I'm pretty freaked out by all of this, but if you have any thoughts on this or anything else, then I would love to hear it. Has anyone had any experiences like this? So my name is Janelle and I'm 21 years old. I'm a French girl and a student in France. Tired of not finding a true love, I decided to lose my virginity with my best friend. Then I find another fantastic friend with which I get along wonderfully on all levels for like 3 months. Then he throws me away because, well, I still love my ex. And being a little fragile at that point, I make my first attempt, go to the emergency room and then the mental hospital. For the smart ones among you, you'll understand that I was already depressed for a few months at this point. Under treatments, I mean. With a strong penchant for alcohol too. And to complete this auto-destruction mechanism, what better than dating apps, right? So a few weeks after my release from the mental hospital, I match up to make a new encounter, and to try and forget about my dear and tender friend. I always meet the guys at home for a first date because I have zero experience, and that's what I did for my very first date. One fine day comes around when I match a guy. His name was Mathway. Mathway is not very beautiful by any means, and has a few extra pounds, but I'm not Beyonce either, so I match. We laugh a little, we have some common tastes, and he especially likes to smoke weed, so I thought, well, perfect plan. We could smoke some joints and have some fun. He gives me some personal information like his address, no idea if it's the real one, and his job, or rather old job I guess. He just got fired apparently. Work or no work though, I don't really care. I don't want to do my life with him anyway. So I explained to him that I'm a bit fragile and that I just came out of a kind of mental clinic and that I'm depressed and blah blah blah. It's for the sole purpose of making him understand that you can't play with me. I also tell him that I'm looking for just a session, but still with discussion, complicity, hugs, stuff like that, and not just a shot in 20 minutes and it's done sort of thing. He assures me too that this is what he's looking for as well, and that he's actually very cuddly, and so I thought perfect. After only maybe 1 or 2 days of discussion, we agree on a date. It was going to be a mojito party at my house, and he was going to bring the joints. He arrives, he's really not cute at all, even worse than in the photos. He has a dirty look, like greasy hair, stained t-shirt. It was a style of a really sort of teenager look, despite him being like 26 years old. And in short, I'm far from thrilled, but I desperately need company. So I offer to make the drinks while I choose a film on television. He runs and passes on the kitchen side to prepare 2 mojitos before joining me on the sofa. We talk a bit. He's not very smart or very interesting at all. So I drown in my drink, hoping to animate the party alone. And this is where I get a 3-day blackout. So, according to our dear Mathway, we would then have drunk and smoked while watching a film before going into the bedroom. I vaguely remember being naked on my bed and seeing him dressed above me, looking at me before turning his heels and just slamming the door. My phone is discharging, my alarm clock isn't ringing. I'm away from a work group appointment, so my friends are worried and they call me. They can't contact me, so they contact my sister, but she also goes to voicemail. The girls come down from my house and ring again and again, but there's no answer. They call the firemen, who manage to open the bottom door, but not the door to my apartment. They knock on the door calling me, and I end up opening the door, dressed in a blanket to hide my nakedness. I look at them with incomprehension. The firemen conclude that I must be hungover and break up while my friends help me to get dressed. They also think that I drank too much, and they notice that my body is covered with like yellow betadine on my arms, legs, stomach, etc. I told them that I burned my arm yesterday and that I wanted to heal myself, but no sign of a burn or anything's on my arm. Besides, I don't even own any betadine. They take my cat and take me back to one of their houses since I'm in a sort of comatose state. I have trouble speaking, I look completely elsewhere as anesthetized, and I even seem to have trouble thinking. The next day, my sister comes to pick me up so I can stay with her for a few days. And everyone is convinced that I tried to end it with drugs or maybe alcohol. But I start complaining about pain in my vulvar area and blood loss. My pill stops my period completely, so my sister takes me to the hospital. I explained to them some of the things that happened, and also that I may have been unprotected since I was unconscious, and maybe I need an AIDS vaccine or something else. I'm advised to file a complaint, and I'm being redirected to the OB emergency. The next day, I finally regain consciousness gently. My relatives see it right away, and I'm a little more lively, and my remarks are more consistent. They meet me in the GYN emergency, and I get swabs done, and I get preventative AIDS treatment and stuff like that. And over the course of a week, I made a series of appointments for blood samples, urine samples, and stuff like that. And I went to file a complaint with the testimony of my friends who met me at home, and my sister who took care of me. And after talking about it around me to people my age, older people as well, but especially medical staff and the police, the term organ trafficking was mentioned more than once. They think the guy maybe chickened out at the last minute or something. But despite my complaint, my bed full of betadine, my underwear torn off, and the blood on the doors of my apartment, what the heck, right? My attacker, he got nothing, and I guess I'll never know what really happened and what he really wanted that night. I would like to point out too that I used to drink and smoke in addition to my treatment, and that never before have I had a blackout of like 3 days. I'm pretty sure that he must have put something in my drink, something strong. Anyway, it was a pretty terrifying encounter, and it was a good lesson, and It's good to talk about, well, all of it, and get it off my chest. So, in 2015 or 2016, I really didn't know what I wanted to do after high school. So I joined a gap year program in the Colorado Rockies, specifically at Snow Mountain Ranch in Granby, Colorado. It's part of YMCA of the Rockies, and it was an awesome gig because although I worked, the room and the board was paid for, and I spent a lot of time hiking, canoeing, and adventuring out of the resort with the friends that I made there to different towns. Honestly, it was one of my all-time favorite memories. But I have some creepy experiences in the woods, like coming across small herds of moose at night. Moose are huge, and hearing coyotes in the distance, feelings of being watched, but overall it was always nature, and although a bit creepy, it wasn't anything David Attenborough hasn't seen, right? But the only unexplainable and creepy experience that I had was experienced by more than one person, and it was when we hiked, but mainly drove, some old logging roads to an abandoned yurt in the middle of the forest. It was Halloween of 2015, and there was a staff party, and it was fun. I went as Gumby in a full costume. But since it's a YMCA-sanctioned event, there was no alcohol. So we decided to ditch the party, and 7 of us crammed into my friend's Jeep Cherokee to go and make a party of our own. It had snowed, and my friend Abby knew about an abandoned yurt because one of our fellow staff would go out there and drink by himself, which I thought was pretty weird, but we were all gung-ho and tired of the Safeway snacks and drinks at the party, so we decided to go for it. The snow started to pick up a bit more as we went out there, but since Abby had a decent off-road vehicle, we managed for the most part. Now, maybe like a decade prior, there was a pine beetle infestation that killed a lot of trees here, so they had to cut down a lot of the forest. When I got there, they were in the middle of replanting, so logging had since ceased, so there were miles of older logging roads abandoned, but the YMCA turned them into sort of Nordic ski trails for the wintertime. The yurt was out there for people who wanted to get out of the elements if they needed. That's what I was told anyway. I know we didn't let customers rent it or anything because I worked at the front desk. But anyway, we drove out there drinking whiskey and blasting some Halloween soundtrack that helped make the ambience a bit spookier. And although it had been snowing a bit, there wasn't enough on the road yet to cause any issues. After a 30-minute drive into the woods, we pulled off to the side where there was a locked gate. Obviously, we jumped it. We had brought pillows and blankets with us because we planned on staying the night. We had to walk like another 15 minutes to get to it. It was in a really cool spot too, like in a clearing and at the bottom of a cliff. It was miles into the woods and away from the main property. But anyway, we drank and smoked for a good while and had a lot of fun. We made snow angels and had a snowball fight, and we went back into the yurt after a while and continued our consumption and started telling scary stories. After a while, we started getting sleepy, and we got in whatever sleeping bags or blankets we brought and tucked ourselves in. We made a couple of jokes as we fell asleep to break the silence, but after a bit, we were pretty much knocked out. Now, at some point, I woke up early to Abby's boyfriend shaking me awake and pointed to a window. When I looked, there was a shadow there. All of a sudden, we heard a loud bang like something had thrown itself onto the side of the yurt, and everyone was up now. The sound of something smacking against the canvas sides started coming from all around us at one point, and at first I thought that it was snow falling off the treetops, but we were in a large clearing with no trees over the yurt. But then we heard the sounds of something climbing up the 3 wooden steps and pausing. We all held our breath, but nothing. Not one sound. Abby was the only girl, and all of us dudes decided to rush the door and see what was out there. We opened the door, but there was nothing. In fact, it was eerily quiet. The worst part, though, was what we found outside of the yurt. which was the distinct lack of any footprints anywhere. No paw prints, no boot prints, not even snowshoe tracks. The snow had even blanketed over the footprints that we had left earlier, so there really should have been something. We thought maybe the wind had lifted the canvas and made it flutter, but when we checked, it was flush with whatever it was attached to, and you just couldn't move it. It was super weird, and we thought maybe the staff member who came out to drink by himself was behind it, but again, we looked everywhere and there were no boot prints. I also don't think that it was the wind because, well, me and Abby's boyfriend saw the shadow by the window, and we all heard footprints on the steps. We were pretty sober at this point too, and all of us wanted to go back, so we left. I never did go back to that yurt, but I can't say that I want to anymore either.